Hello, everybody. We're with
Hello.
another episode of Creation Science Theater. This is Dr. Deino, your host, joined by Mark Reed and Better Than Ember.
Woo, woo.
Just Ember.
Yep. Unfortunately, Beamsy is not going to be able to make it on stream today, just due to some unforeseen complications. But we should still have a pretty good old time. Well, at least as good as we can be. My software wouldn't let me export the video, so we're going to have to watch it in the editor.
Oh, adventures.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hopefully
that's
that
weird.
doesn't go too
What
horribly.
are you using?
Clipchamp.
Oh, okay. That sounds... Yeah, okay.
It-
Never heard of it.
It works
Not
okay.
familiar either.
It works, I'll actually say, pretty decent. Even if you don't pay for the premium features.
Mm-hmm.
Righty. Well, let us go ahead and get started. We have 27-ish minutes to go through, and it'll probably turn into a lot more than that.
Why do I feel like Kurt Wise is like an oxymoron?
No reason, I'm sure.
Okay,
I'm sure that's
okay.
just your
Okay.
evolutionist bias.
Yeah, bias. All bias.
His middle name is Un, like the French. Kurt Unwise.
Are you
Wise.
serious, or is that a joke?
That's a joke.
That's a joke.
Okay.
It's clearly
I mean, it'd be
Kurt
cool if
P.
it were,
Wise
though.
on the screen right now. Like, it's
Okay,
clearly not
okay,
funny.
Okay, now I see that. Whatever. Fair warning, people. I've done a little bit of editing on this. It's probably going to be horrific. So let's get started.
Raise those expectations.
I mean, it was
no sound.
probably horrific to begin with, so it's an improvement.
Oh, yeah, it was bloody awful. Oh. Well, okay. Never mind. They're so awful it crashed the thing for a second. Anyway, he is sped up. He's on 2 times speed because 1 time speed is absolutely painful with this guy.
No sound.
No sound?
No sound.
Oh, dear. Share audio checkbox. Huh. There is no share tab audio.
No, you have to either share a Chrome window or share a screen, basically, to get sound. I don't know why that is.
Weird. Well, guess I'll be sharing the whole screen. So.
That's what I do. And sometimes the share Chrome audio doesn't work for me either, so it's a bit of a hit and miss for that one.
Weird.
Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
No,
we're seeing
that's the
infinite
wrong
realms.
screen. That is the... Okay.
Behold, an infinite regress, and they said it couldn't be done.
I don't said that.
The various apologists.
Yeah.
It's one of the arguments for why God is a necessary being, because you can't have an infinite regress. They just brush it off. It just can't be done.
No, set 2 mirrors up against one another and you've got an infinite regress.
Yarr.
We're going to look at the paleontology of the flood. Paleontology is a science. However, with a science, we should start with scripture.
And
Why?
I think we have our first contention.
Wow.
Why?
What was that, 2 seconds?
Just under 6.
Why? Which scripture? Can we use the Bhagavad Gita? Which scripture are we talking about here? I wonder which scripture we're talking about here.
Maybe it depends on region.
Maybe.
But just, yeah, sure. Go right into science with your own biases at the forefront. That's absolutely what we should do. That's only led to great things.
But it says, he said paleontology is a science, but it says flood paleontology is a science, which it really is not. It's a pseudoscience, is what it is.
Yeah, just a little bit.
when we look at Scripture, we find very little explicitly in the Bible about fossils and their formation.
He then goes on about the flood for a bit.
Okay.
For more than a year. It killed all the land animals and humans, but again, no explicit mention of paleontology. So we're going to have to learn about our flood paleontology from the fossils themselves, all the while keeping in mind, as we're studying them, that we can't forget the Bible. We've got to keep going.
Okay, but why though?
He's really front-loading this one, isn't he?
Just a little.
Man, killed all land animals and man. Yeah, it actually killed everything that walked upon the land. Which is weird because there's insects. Anyway, like it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And probably should have killed all plants too.
Yeah. And we should find fossils like everywhere, kind of thing, including at the very tops of all mountains. Like there's some mountains we don't. It's.
Yeah. There should be bodies everywhere, all mixed up in a massive jumble. But what we find is pretty ordered, if you know what to look at, which is odd.
But it's just if anything. But it seems like he's trying to say if anything conflicts with the biblical data, and look, there is no such thing as biblical data. Okay, there's just Bible stories. That's not data. If the flood account tells you little to nothing about fossils, it's not data. But you're basically saying if anything conflicts with the Bible, believe the Bible over, your science. Basically, that's essentially what the setup is.
Yeah.
If only we could.
That dishonest.
If only we could find some kind of system where the stuff in Scripture showed us what we actually find in the world. Like if there were a Scripture that described the geologic column, and then we dug, and then we found it, then we'd be like, "Hey, look at that."
Yeah.
Yep.
Back and checking to make sure that what we're postulating about fossils is in fact consistent with the biblical account.
Stop! What?
Yeah, there's a little bit of Monty Python in here because I felt.
Okay.
I feel like the Bridge Guardian is an appropriate moderator of his BS.
Could all fossils have been created by God? Well,
First question.
Yep. Could they have?
Look, well, here's the thing. Like, if you're postulating an infinite God that has omni powers and sort of thing, then there's nothing it can't do. But that's only logically. What we want to have, sort of epistemologically, reasons why we believe that. Not just is it possible. It's possible a magic unicorn did it. Let's not just say, oh, is it logically possible? We've got good reasons to believe it. Is it possible that aliens came down? Sure, it's possible, but we don't believe that. This guy.
Well, there are a few people.
Well, yeah. I mean, sure. But when I say we, I mean, the scientific consensus doesn't believe it, kind of thing, because there's no good reasons, there's no evidence leaning you in that direction. I feel like he's going to switch from could God have done it to God definitely did do it,
Yeah, he goes into God definitely did it this way.
Yeah.
Is
it possible that perhaps the fossils were created by God in the beginning? The problem is that some of the fossils are in fact animal fossils, and thus they are direct evidence of animal death. It's then unlikely that God would have created in the original creation evidence of death in the original creation that wasn't going to be introduced into the world until after the fall.
So I feel like that already kind of shoves a bit of a hole in his argument. Or, well, in the question. I could be wrong on that.
At least some fossils formed after creation. I feel like you're sort of begging the question there. Like, show it's a creation.
Yeah.
Show that
we'll just start with creation and it'll demonstrate itself probably.
And I love how he's in like the high school science lab kind of thing. Like, it's just, please, the credibility.
Yeah.
Until after the fall. So I think we're forced to conclude, at least that when we're looking at the fossils of animals, that we have to be looking at a time after the creation.
So were any fossils formed in the flood?
Are any of them formed in the flood? Let's look at the major features of Earth's fossils to
Anytime you see text pop up on screen like that, I've skipped like a minute or two of him just going off
Blabbing
on
about the
tangents.
Bible.
He does that all the time.
To answer that particular question, we look at the biostratigraphic column. That is a representation of the rocks of the Earth as they're stacked up across the Earth. It is a biostratigraphic column. It is a column of rock layers or strata. It's the stratigraphic portion of it. And in the rocks, there are organisms. That's the bios that we're referring to. So this is a stack of rocks and their associated fossils as they are found across the planet. In the lower part of the biostratigraphic column, even in some places tens of thousands of feet, we have rocks, but we do not have animal fossils. In fact, we don't have plant fossils. We don't have any fossils of any macroorganisms at all. The only fossils we find in this lowest portion of the fossil record are bacteria. This is the most of the Precambrian, with the exception of the very uppermost Precambrian, which has got a few more organisms in it. There are no animals for most of the Precambrian.
Hey, that is mostly
What does that tell
true.
you? What does that tell you, though? Like, what is your... Like, I want to know the chain of events that led you to go, well, that means that God put them there. Like, I want to know how you get from the more basal forms being lower in the stratigraphic sort of layers to, well, that's obviously a flood. I don't...
Yeah, the connective tissue is not there.
I'm also wondering about Genesis. Like, where does it mention when the bacteria are created? Are they created with the plants? Are they created with the animals? Were they just in the water from the beginning before God even parted it? Where do they come from? But there's no animals there, so they must have preceded them.
Well, I think
maybe God is Luca.
Well, I think one of the... It might be sort of to do with the translation. I think the way you can translate animals in their thing is creatures, essentially, because the Jewish people didn't have a designation of animals and plants. They just had sort of, plants and creatures kind of thing. Like it's sort of, it can be interpreted in many different ways. So I don't think that's a problem for them per se, but yeah, it's kind of, it's a good point. Like if you've got something like viruses, for instance, where were those fuckers created? Were they the fall? Is that when they were created? Did viruses exist before then? What about fungus? They just thought they were plants. Fungus was plants kind of thing. So,
right. Yeah. But yeah, he starts off by saying the Precambrian was mostly just bacteria. Yep. A little simplified, but that's mostly right. If you call algae bacteria. And then he points out that everything above what he's labeled as one circle, everything gets more and more modern.
Yeah.
It gets closer to modern day stuff. And I could be wrong. I don't think he ever really explains why it gets more modern as you go higher.
No.
We look at that modern fauna, the rocks that represent that modern fauna, we also have in that particular zone increasingly modern fossils. As a matter of fact, again, referring to marine organisms, they subdivided this upper portion of the column according to how many of the fossils we find in that rock are in fact modern. It's percent modern species. At the very base, we have rocks with no modern species at all. As we go up the Cenozoic, we have increasing percentage of modern species. Also, when we expand this and look more closely at it, we find that species are found from a certain depth up to a certain point. It's called the stratigraphic range of a given organism. We have overlapping stratigraphic ranges. We have organisms that seem to begin at one point, end at another, and another organism is overlapping with it. There's no clear place where we can make a boundary between some event before, some event after. So this seems to be a continuous sequence. That combined with the percent living species suggests that we have no breaks in here from any no significant breaks in sedimentation and fossilization.
So what might that tell you?
Mm-hmm.
That might go a little against a global flood, a destructive flood, just a little.
What is this guy's background? I mean, it looks like he's trying to be a science teacher. What is his background?
I actually do not know.
He's a geologist. Kurt Patrick Wise. Yeah, that's him. He has a PhD in geology from Harvard University. So this is a Harvard-educated geologist. He earned a PhD in geology under the supervision of Stephen Jay Gould. In addition, He has an MA in geology from Harvard and an MA in geology
Or
from
BA
University
from
of Chicago.
Chicago.
Wow.
Yeah, so he got to study under Stephen Jay Gould and then became a creationist. That's wow.
Oh wow!
I did not know
Dawkins
that.
wrote about him in the God Delusion. Kurt Wise's story is just plain pathetic and contemptible. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff that Dawkins does that I don't really
Oh,
agree with.
no.
But the wound to his career and his life's happiness was self-inflicted, so unnecessary, so easy to escape. All he had to do was toss out the Bible, or interpret it symbolically or allegorically, as theologians do. Instead, he did the fundamentalist thing and tossed out science, evidence, and reasons along with his dreams and hopes.
You got to give Dawkins credit for something. He knows how to eviscerate somebody.
Yeah, I mean that is harsh.
It's a special skill. Yeah, apparently Kurt is not only the director of the Center for Creation Research, but also a professor at the professor of natural history at the Truett McConnell University in Cleveland, Georgia.
Who's that?
Our buddy here.
Creation Research Center. Yeah, he went out and just straight into creationism. That is that's terrible.
Yeah. I mean student loans suck, but that's a little extreme of a dive. And actually, wait, he would have graduated in like the 80s, right? So student debt wouldn't have been too bad.
Yeah,
this is what
1989.
This is what Wise wrote about it. Although there are scientific reasons for accepting a young Earth, I'm a young Earth creationist because that is my understanding of the scripture. As I shared with my professors years ago when I was in college, if all the evidence in the universe turns against creationism, I would be the first to admit it. But I would still be a creationist because that is what the word of God seems to indicate.
Wow. So
Jeez.
it's not even like mental gymnastics. It's straight up cognitive dissonance. He knows it's false, but believes it anyway.
Wow.
Damn. And yeah, now he's stuck doing this because no one would take him seriously.
No, of course no one takes him seriously. And, I mean, kudos to his honesty, I guess. I guess you can say that, but, to at least admit, hey, it doesn't matter, all the evidence shows that I'm wrong. I'm still going to believe I'm right because I believe the scripture. Okay, thanks for being honest, mate. Now you can go over there and do your song and dance with all the people that do the creationism stuff, because, that's horrendous.
Renounce science.
Go lie to kids. Go have fun.
Mm.
And like that's why this is in a high school classroom, because I'm pretty sure this got sold to religious schools. Like almost certainly. This feels like supplemental material in a science class.
So if you ever thought you have to be intelligent and stuff to be a PhD, this man is a PhD geologist who thinks that column that he's described accurate, well, at least, relatively accurately.
Mostly accurate, yeah.
Is a result of a flood when clearly it's not.
See, the thing is, I think he is intelligent. He's just decided to lie to people to make his money. He's using the stuff he learned to make his lie more convincing.
No, is he lying though? I mean, if he actually says, well, I'm going to believe the Bible over, if he's turned fundamentalist, if he is an absolute fundamentalist and says it doesn't matter what the evidence is, I will believe the Bible over any amount of evidence, he might not be lying. He might be thinking that...
Well, in my opinion, he would have to be lying to misrepresent all the evidence like he does.
Okay. All right. No, that's fair enough.
Because he presents okay evidence, but then he interprets it through his creationist lens, as most of what he does here, and refuses to accept the conventional explanation that's more likely.
And then when you look within families,
Yeah, Monty Python.
in this same zone, we find that there are many families that show a sequence of fossils all the way up, and in fact a series of very logical family lineages, one species not only overlapping with the next, but in fact logically transitioning from that species. There's no direct transitions, but it looks like you could line those up. It looks like those species really could have transitioned one to another. An example here from the frog family, but there's many other examples that we have.
Okay, true. And I don't see how this is evidence for his point.
Yeah.
In this column, what this suggests is that this upper portion of the column, which is often called the Cenozoic, is in fact after the flood. It is the modern world. It's in between the Cenozoic and the Precambrian then that we most logically will put the fossils of the flood. In that zone.
And
Well,
I mean,
that would mean that the animals in the ark were not modern animals.
yeah, like
Like
not
they're all
only
dinosaurs
that,
and shit. Like all of them.
not only that, like basically what he's saying here. We've used elephants as an example before, but let's look at a worse one: whales. We would have to have whales developing from essentially a hoofed wolf or a hooved wolf into a crocodile mammal into a whale in what is it, like 3,000-4,000 years?
Yeah.
No, that's just not.
But like it also doesn't explain why. Okay, you've got the modern animals, but you've also got sort of the flood fossils. Okay, so let's go. Why are so animals that aren't modern, like megafauna, for instance? I think we lost Ember as well. He might be having problems with his internet. He has been having some issues.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, he's back.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've been in the other screen.
But sort of so you have to ask that why during these flood fossil things. So the Cenozoic, what was around in the Cenozoic kind of thing?
Essentially all modern groups.
Yeah.
Like all carnivore and go ahead.
Yeah, but that also includes megafauna. So let's take something earlier. Like you've got something like Microraptor, which is quite late in the dinosaur era, and something like Brontosaurus or something that's a sauropod earlier on kind of thing. Why is the I mean, you can sort of say, hey, the Brontosaurus is rather large kind of thing, but why are they always in that order if it's a flood?
Yeah.
And why do you get smaller, like the compy, sort of lower down? Like, why? This makes no sense whatsoever. I can't.
Yeah.
What's the compy?
It just does. Compsognathus.
Compsognathus. That's right. Compsognathus.
Yep.
Yeah, like some people have famously said, why don't we find, bunny rabbits underneath the Triceratopses?
Well, he's trying to say that the modern animals were after the flood kind of thing, which is a weird thing to say.
Yeah, so if that is true, then in his idea, did the dinosaurs go on the ark, or did Noah just abandon all the dinosaurs?
I don't know.
And therapsids and basal amphibians and sea scorpions, which I can see him leaving those behind, but like Noah didn't do a very good job if this is true.
I'm kind of surprised no creationist has come up with the idea yet that the reason dinosaurs are extinct today is because Noah had to like chuck them overboard because they ate too much, or needed to feed the Brontos to the lions to keep them alive, or something.
Right, right.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
I
like
don't know.
Hoven's explanation is they were all in eggs, which
Yes,
doesn't say why they aren't here now.
right.
Yeah, I mean, two birds with one stone. If the extinction is also part of the flood story, but what do I know? Trying to make things simple.
And
But I guess what I'm trying to say is there are smaller, lighter dinosaurs below bigger, heavier dinosaurs. That's what I'm trying to get
Yeah.
across. Like it isn't just, oh well, the big ones went to the top and the small ones kind of thing. Because the
I mean,
um
here, Archaeopteryx is from the Middle Jurassic, and whereas we have stuff like, say, T-Rex in the Cretaceous.
Cretaceous, yeah.
And like, even if our dating methods are wrong, that still will always put T-Rex hundreds of feet higher than Archaeopteryx in
Mhm.
any rock layer.
Yeah, and the Tyrannosaurus is from the Cretaceous kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you've got the Compy is from the Jurassic, which is before then, and the Compy is like the size of a turkey. It's tiny.
Same for Archaeopteryx here. And
Yeah.
actually, a little fun fact, there have been fossils of Archaeopteryx found without any feather impressions, and at least some of them were mistaken for Compsognathus.
Yeah.
Because the skeletons are just so similar. You can only really tell if you have feather impressions or are really familiar with their anatomy. Pretty cool.
But it looks like something, so it must be that thing. And that's what we get all the time from these people. It looks like this, so it must
It
be
looks like
the
a maple
case.
leaf.
Right, or it looks like they were laid down by a flood. That's kind of the thing. Well, it doesn't matter what it looks like from a casual glance. You've got to actually investigate that. You've got to actually put it together.
Yeah.
Bone, then, between the upper Precambrian and the base of the Cenozoic, we have billions and billions of fossils. There's billions of organisms that were in fact buried in the flood. As a matter of fact, if you look at the fossil record of the flood, you find all sorts of organisms in the fossil record that you do not find in the living world. There's a long list of these. There's a 57 classes that we have in the fossil record, but we don't have in the present world. We have 231 orders in the fossil.
I'm not going to check his numbers, but that sounds about right.
But I mean, what does that tell you? This is the thing. Like,
Noah was really bad at his job, okay?
He should have kept a ledger.
But I mean, you get other things like, for instance, there's some extinct during the Cretaceous. There's some extinct sort of orders of sea turtle, for instance.
Sea turtles, mate.
Oh, there's extinct orders of mammals too.
Yeah. But my point is, how did the flood kill them? They swim, dude. Like, what?
Yeah,
like,
good point.
Why? Why would they suddenly just die out? Like,
right, Mr. Wise, why isn't this still alive? I want my Helicoprion.
Such a weird thing, yeah.
Yeah. Where's my Helicoprion? Where's my Mosasaur?
That is terrifying, quite frankly. Like, you think
little
sharks were terrifying? Oh, holy crap, that is terrifying.
Where's my Zephactinus? Yeah, this thing was a nightmare.
The Dunkleosaurus as well.
Dunkleosteus.
Dunkleosteus. I'm sorry. I only read the names. I don't actually talk about them.
You're fine. But... Yeah, the dunk. Yeah, why don't we have the dunk anymore? Which actually, by the way, was recently downsized.
Was it?
Yeah. Just based on other placoderms, other armored fish, it would have possibly looked closer to this, but I don't think we have any anything
But
behind
those
the
are
head. So
real
we don't say
skulls, right? I mean, those are real
Oh, yeah, the
skulls
skulls
that
are
they're
real.
sort of armored plates kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like a transformer. Like that's the thing. Like it's
It's a Decepticon fish.
it's a Decepticon. Absolutely. It does. Like, tell me I'm wrong. It does look like a Decepticon.
No,
It looks
you're
like it's
right.
gonna transform into a robot and start seeking like the power cube or whatever the hell they're
A
after.
robot fish with the guillotine for a face.
Yeah.
Because these aren't teeth; these are sharpened jaw blades.
Yep.
It's freaky.
Yeah.
Oh, Hillhugger brings up a good point. Why are platypus only in southern Australia when they can swim around?
Well,
Who knows?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, platypus aren't in any. They're kind of only in shallow rivers and ponds and marshes and stuff. They're not very good at swimming. I guess I'm trying to point out. I suppose they're not bad. It's just, yeah.
You'd think they'd have found some habitable zones along the way,
No, that is true. Yeah.
like without crossing open ocean, but I guess not.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, they sort of say that the ocean open was fresh water because they can't reconcile the plants being covered with salt water, because that would just, like a year of salt water or 7 months or whatever they say it is, that would salt the earth, and like everything would absolutely die. So they have to say it was fresh water. Not that plants will do any better, covered by a couple of kilometers of fresh water, but
Yeah, and plus that just kills all the saltwater plants.
and the saltwater fish. But sort of there's apologetics to sort of say, hey, they adapted really fast, and just a whole load of nonsense to sort of try and get around it.
Yeah.
It's very bewildering. It is very bewildering. And I don't have the chat open. Let me get the chat. Hey, Hillhugger, and John Raps, and Titan Uranus is here. Hello.
Titan.
Good to see you all. Titan.
I got it up on my phone.
World, and there's even larger number of families and genera and species. So we're looking at not only lots of fossils, but fossils of a world that was far more diverse than the present world. So the flood seems to have decimated life. By decimated, I mean it had a certain diversity before the flood, and it significantly narrowed that diversity in the course.
Sorry, a little pet peeve. Decimate means to destroy a tenth of something.
Same.
Oh,
That
come on.
bugs
No,
the
let's
hell
not
out of
do
me,
this.
too.
Let's not do this definitional thing. He's obviously meaning it sort of colloquially, like to decimate to mean.
I know he is, but
Don't
it's
do
just
this
like,
to me,
that's
okay?
not
I've had
the meaning
too
of the
many
word.
definition wars. I'm going to be charitable and say he's using it. He's using it colloquially. Don't do this. Don't. You're better than this, Dr. Deino. You're better than this.
Am I?
That has yet to be defined.
Of the flood.
Yep. Yeah, and this putting all the mass extinction events into one. Well
Yeah.
done, Mr. Wise. Well done.
This suggests
But it doesn't
that was, in fact,
explain why we see the extinction of these, especially like the sharks you were showing, and the sort of really the marine animals that really are like the megalodon and things like that. Just real tanks of the sort of Cretaceous and Jurassic, like why the Mosasaurus. Nothing's threatening that thing. You know,
except another Mosasaurus, yeah.
right? Nothing's like that thing is so big. It's ridiculous.
Smaller than the one in Jurassic World, but essentially it's an aquatic T-Rex in size.
Basically, yeah.
Like that's with the mouth like a moray eel. Weirdly enough, weird case of convergent evolution. They actually have two sets of jaws, one inside the other. It's weird.
that the flood was, in fact, a catastrophe. It was a very unusual event that very rapidly destroyed a significant number of organisms, both on the land and on the sea. Another characteristic of the fossils in this zone of what we're ascribing to the flood is that they're common and well preserved. common and well preserved.
I'm gonna let.
Many.
What about all the ones that aren't well preserved? Like a lot of the fossils we find that are not well preserved.
Yeah. Wait, well preserved? Are they though?
Well, there are certainly well preserved fossils, but there's tons and tons that aren't.
Have been, they've been squished or warped or distorted. A lot of the common mistakes that we have made, and probably are still making, has been due to distortions in the fossils.
More so in the past when we had a worse understanding of it, but
Yeah, sure. But that there's probably still some things we've mistaken because of distortions or the fossil being smushed kind of thing.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, often, like, the most common thing you'll find of a fossil is just a few isolated bits of whatever creature whatever plant or animal it's from. Like, if you find a full specimen, that's the find of a lifetime. If it's anything larger than like a trilobite. And even saying that, I've never found a full trilobite. I've only found like half of one at most.
Right.
Fossils. And this is kind of an unusual characteristic because in the present world, it's not an easy thing to, in fact, it's not often that you can find fossils. It's not easy to produce fossils. If we play a little game and ask ourselves,
yeah, we have fossils forming all the time.
Fossilization rare at present. Well, it is a rare event. That's the thing. Like, it is rare, but it's not like it's not happening today. It is. We're seeing it happen.
Well, that's another point that he doesn't seem to be aware that he's making against himself, because it is rare. So the fact that we have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of fossils is another example of the huge age of the Earth.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And he talks about this for like 5 minutes, so I've cut it down quite a bit.
if you wanted to be a fossil, if you were a little critter that wanted to be a fossil, what would it take to get yourself fossilized?
Yeah. The conditions must be rare.
How do you get into a position where you can be fossilized? Best way would be to be buried far enough or deep enough that you're not only out of sight of the scavengers, but you're below the depth of oxygen for the aerobic decomposers. Problem is, aerobic decomposers usually can burrow down scores of feet in a very quick time.
Yep. More rambling about decomposers.
Once you've been made into a fossil, you've still got to avoid the process of erosion that brings your fossil back up, brings you as a fossil back up to the surface. After all, you want to get discovered and end up in a museum drawer. But in order to get discovered, you were deeply buried, so you're going to have to be brought up to the surface somehow so that you can be discovered. In other words, erosion of the stuff that's above you has to occur, but that puts you at risk of being destroyed by that same erosion. It's a very tricky process. It's a very unusual, unlikely thing that you would end up getting exposed to the surface, not trampled by a cow or something like that before you can be discovered and put into a museum drawer.
You don't say.
Yeah. But see, that works against him, because the amount of fossils that we've got, if the process is that rare, then we should have less fossils over those 6,000 years you're claiming than the millions and millions of fossils we've got. That suggests that, hey, it's been a lot of time for those fossils to accumulate, especially in the way that you're describing. I see. That's the thing. I don't know how anybody can be a Harvard-educated geologist, look at that fossil record and go, oh, that's one event. It's baffling.
Oh, don't worry, Hillhugger. We'll get to footprints. But I remember Gutsuck Gibbon bringing up a statistic in one video. Like, we have so many stone tools in Africa alone that Noah and his descendants would have to be doing nothing but forming stone tools 24 hours a day their entire lives.
Yeah.
For thousands of years to come up with all the stone tools we have.
Well, I love what Josh pointed out. I mean, I brought up the Tower of Babel myself because that's 101 years after the flood. They built the biggest tower ever known at the time, which is ridiculous for 8 people to turn into enough to have a civilization. But Josh pointed out that the Akkadian Empire was around at the time, kind of thing. Anywhere from 800,000 to 1 point something million people in that empire, depending on how what sort of place you put it at. And that's from 8 people, and that was 138 years later. It's ridiculous. Like, that is so absurd.
Yeah, Egypt repopulated so fast there wasn't even a blip in their historical records.
Right.
Yep.
As a consequence, you wouldn't expect the commonness of fossils that we see in the fossil record, and certainly the fact that they're extremely well preserved. What this suggests is that there's a rapid burial that's occurring during the flood that is not occurring in the present world, or not commonly occurring in the present world, which combined with this evidence of catastrophe suggests we have a catastrophe of very rapid burial during the flood.
Okay, and how about all the fossils that weren't buried rapidly and were crushed underfoot before they could be preserved? Like, there's a very famous example called the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry. It was essentially a tiny pond in the middle of nowhere that a bunch of animals congregated around to try and survive the dry season. Most of them did not. The big herbivores died first because they needed more water and food, and none was left, so they died, followed by all the others. And we can see a progression of those bones getting destroyed by other animals until eventually you just have basically this big layer of Allosaurus because all the rest of them died.
Looking at now 44, 60 Allosaurus fossils.
Yeah. And all you have of any other animal is just fragments. And I think a lot of the Allosaurus themselves have marks that showing they were being cannibalized.
No.
Yeah, that's some rapid burial.
And that's the Jurassic National Monument. If you're traveling through, where the hell is this? Utah? Oh, why would you be traveling through Utah? Okay.
It has a lot of cool fossils.
Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty area, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah, the mountains are gorgeous. Just stay out of Salt Lake City.
And I think I'm still traumatized by that debate I had the other day. I don't want to go anywhere near Mormons for the foreseeable future.
I want to go to the Great Salt Flats at least once in my life.
Oh yeah, I want to get to the Bonneville. During one of those periods, it's like twice a year it rains, and they only get like half a centimeter of water, but the whole thing turns into a frickin' mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Hilhager points out that in Australia there's stone flakes. Apparently the Aboriginals spent their entire existence throwing stone tools around. The Aboriginals, we've known that they've been in Australia for 40,000, 50,000 years alone. Like we know that. They've got cave art. They've got, a rich history going back a long way. So it's kind of this, it's so silly to think that they could have been 8 people off the ark, get to Australia, and sort of then leave the evidence of their civilizations and their tribal things and all of this culture in such a short amount of time. It's baffling. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Just like I do feel like it is worth mentioning. Like, we talk about this mostly for shits and giggles. Like, I think it is important to remember that very few people out there in the world actually believe this.
I know.
Vocal minority of people.
I gotta keep reminding myself that, especially like I've done like maybe 1 or 2 sort of pride support videos, as in I've been attacking people or against it. And you've got to remember that the majority of the world is absolutely in support of these people. Like this is the small vocal minority. It's a bit more serious in the US, but over here, the Prime Minister went to a pride festival kind of thing. The leader of the country attended Pride. Like it's just, I think we've got to see more of that.
Representation is how we get normalization.
Yeah, I think that the leaders have to step up and lead. Say, "Hey, I'm going to this thing. Screw my reputation. Screw what the right wing Christians will think of it. I'm going to this thing because they are my electorate. They are people that vote. They are part of the fabric of democracy. They're what's it called when they're a constituent, right?
Yeah, I
They
agree
they're
with
your
you,
boss.
Mark.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, at least here in the U.S., like the right religious body is one of the biggest voting blocks. So if a politician wants to get elected, they usually have to pay at least some lip service to them.
Yeah, I
And
just feel like they should be worried less about what getting re-elected and worried more about what's best for the country. That's what I
I would
think.
prefer that. I'd prefer that for sure. But
Yeah, it would be nice. And as to numbers, I just looked up a Gallup poll from 2019. It's the most recent one that I could find quickly,
Okay.
and it's in the U.S. 40% of Americans identify as creationist. An additional 30% or 33% are general Christians, and
Mm,
22% have no religious affiliation, which is an increase. It's gone up by
yeah.
7% since 2013. So that's like a 50% increase of that percent. But the creationists are still the biggest group out of any
yeah,
subgroup in the US.
Yeah, and
yeah,
and it's kind of, but I guess I'm reminding myself that's not what it's like in the rest of the world, and there's no reason why the US has to be like that. Um, I saw a Ken Ham video the other day, and I was thinking of doing something on it where he's saying, um, um, that we're losing basically. So they're acknowledging that they're losing people. People are leaving
Mm-hmm.
churches. People are leaving religions. People are leaving all over the place. And I felt like and so they're sort of addressing, how do we address this? How do we get people back in? And it's like, um, you've got to
quit
remind yourself
denying
things are
obvious
changing.
science.
Well, yeah, that's a good start, because you have people like this sort of, saying absurd things. It's absurd.
Mhm. Like, I, like genuinely, I have no problem with most Christians. Most Christians are kind,
Hmm.
normal people who
Yeah.
just want to who just want the best for everyone, and I'm okay with that.
Mm.
I have a problem when a group of people like this willingly denies science, because
But
that
what do you
has
do?
demonstrably snowballed into
What do you do
harm.
when somebody is like, it doesn't matter what you can present, I will believe this book, no matter the evidence, no matter how overwhelming it is, no matter how it conflicts with reality, or like appears to conflict with reality, I will believe this book over anything you can present. Like, it's such a,
I
it's
I,
yeah.
I would I would probably do my best to point out how irrational that is to the people around them, because even if they themselves cannot be convinced, some of the people
Yeah.
around them might be, and that's probably the best I can hope for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
often
that's true.
someone with an extremist position, you can't change their mind, but they provide a useful fulcrum to give you the leverage to persuade other people who aren't so very set that maybe that isn't the belief system they want to latch onto.
Hmm. Like, if I get in a debate, am I talking to one person on YouTube? Sure, I'm
No,
talking to a person on YouTube who
well, not
has a
really.
few thousand subscribers who will probably watch the debate, and at least a
Hmm.
few of those few thousand might be swayed by my arguments more than theirs. That is what I hope for. Anyway, he has another insane thing to say.
Another observation that we deduce from the fossils is that the fossils have been transported a very long ways and that they've been transported along lines of latitude. These kinds of inferences suggest over and over again that organisms in this flood fossil zone have been carried huge distances to be buried where they are. They've been
So he goes on a little diatribe about coral there. Um, he's not right. Like, he's
All
not right. Like a lot of or I'm just going to keep. Well, actually, no. Plants are a better example. We find tons of plant fossils called rhizoliths. They're root fossils. We find them almost anywhere we find soil deposition.
Right.
And they have to be in place because they are burrowing down through and in the soil, crossing each other,
Right.
stuff like that. And even with them, we find lots of animal fossils too that are pretty well suited to the environment they died in. So he is just wrong. Like we do find some fossils that, like say, got washed into a river and were obviously carried downstream,
Mhm.
but it's pretty obvious when that happens. Like it's pretty easy to tell on the bone because they'll be super broken up and super withered most of the time.
Buried rapidly, but they've also been carried a long ways before they were buried. And when you start putting all the pieces together and do this for a number of different organisms, you notice that when they are buried in the same kind of latitude you might expect them to have lived in. For example, with coral. Coral in the present world is restricted to within about 30 degrees north and south of the equator because they require rather warm temperature in the water. They would like a situation where calcium carbonate is in the water and ready to precipitate out, easy for the organisms to take out calcium carbonate and deposit shell material, coral material with it from that material. And so when we see these corals that we have to trace a long distance, we still find them in this burial site that's a long ways from wherever they came from, typically within a short distance of the equator. So what we seem to see is consistently, if you can figure this out for a given fossil, if it's evident with a given fossil what climate it's normally living in, it's very frequently, most of the time, found in the same latitude as it should have been growing in.
No.
That's not right at all. Like there's
like I said, most fossils probably died in the environment that they are preserved in. Even discounting that, like as a small example, I live in Iowa. I am surrounded by coral fossils, and I know you can find them pretty far north of me. That's not normal coral growing latitude.
Can I make a request?
Yeah.
Can I have a wrench?
Sure. Just a second. Yep. Something going on?
Yeah, I just wanted to link in time because Nick's been doing some really good work on Ukraine and the Trump stuff. You know, he's been doing some amazing stuff lately, so I wanted to give him a big shout out.
If it'll save the change. Come on.
He's on a really weird time for me, my time zone. He goes a bit earlier, but I know for US people, he's doing some amazing work. And I've caught sort of, videos when I can.
There we go.
Yeah,
You are now a moderator.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Did that work?
I mean, I've never heard of In Time, but if you say they're good, I'll believe you.
Oh,
yeah,
phenomenal. Not to blow smoke up Nick's ass, but I mean, the regular stuff with Ukraine coverage and other current events, that's all wonderful. But the breaking news stuff, like when there were protests in the streets of I forget, was it Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, when the Israeli government basically just decided they're going to be open tyrants. It was there. It was on point. It was topical.
Okay.
And he also has sort of he's got I can't remember his name. I'm sorry, Nick. He's got somebody that's sort of more right wing on the panel that sort of can provide an alternative. I remember seeing the who's that kid that shot people at the right, Kyle Rittenhouse, I think it was. Yeah, I remember watching his coverage of that, and that was absolutely fantastic. Like, he was absolutely on point. He had someone there from the other side to provide an alternative view. It was really balanced and really fair and just really good. So yeah. Anyway, I think I've gone on about that enough. I just wanted to drop a link for it.
I mean, you guys don't have to share, but just out of curiosity, do you think he should have been found guilty or not guilty? I'm just
I
curious.
do, yes. I think that I think that okay. So here's my thing. Like, obviously, he should never have been there in the first place. Like, in my opinion, he should never have been there. There's no reason why you'd give a 17-year-old a gun and try and defend buildings with it. That is a recipe for disaster. I know 17-year-olds. I'd never give them a gun. Me myself as a 17-year-old, do not like. I would not give myself like that. Is ridiculous. That is stupid. That is one of the stupidest things you could ever do. Is give somebody of that age a gun. Like some of them would be fine. Don't get me wrong, but it's just we've got to make the laws for the lowest common denominator. That's the way it works. That's the way it works. And the lowest common denominator of 17-year-olds is shocking.
Okay. How about you, Ember?
It's a more complex issue than people like to lay it out, but to boil it down for simple soundbite purposes, yeah, he could have come to the protest, but bringing a gun across state lines and then going above and beyond and pretending to play cop, and there's so many lines he crossed, not just the geographical one.
Okay. I mean, like you said, it is a complicated issue. But from what I have heard, he didn't bring the gun across the state line. And a lot of people seem to make a big deal about crossing the state line. Speaking as someone who lived on one, in a situation not dissimilar to him, in fact, in the same general area, just going into a different state is extremely common around here. Plus, he also worked in that city. So he had a connection there, and his dad lived there too. Based on all the footage I've seen, sure, I agree. He probably shouldn't have been there in the first place. But I believe he acted in self-defense, personally, just based on all I've seen.
I think maybe the first shot he did, I think when the guy was the second person he shot, I think he wasn't. The guy with the pistol that had his hand up, I think he, like, the pistol wasn't even pointed at him. I think he shot without being in danger.
So granted, I'm pulling from memories here. If I recall correctly, he did aim his gun at him because he saw he had a gun, but he didn't shoot at first. He only shot once the guy lowered his pistol to aim at him.
I don't. That wasn't my recollection of it. But, yeah. Well, look, at the end of the day, no 17-year-old should have a gun in the first place. That's my opinion. If you're not old enough to vote at 17, you're not old enough to carry a gun around and act as a militia. I'm sorry.
Fair. I feel in some situations guns are permissible, like for hunting, because I know a lot of teenagers who help their family hunt. But fair enough.
Nope, not in my opinion. Not in my opinion. I think you should need to have a license, and the gun needs to be registered, just like you would a car. I think it's ridiculous that you guys can just go out and get a gun, and it's just like nothing at all.
I agree with that. I think there should be much more regulation.
I think that anybody underage can't have a gun. It's ridiculous that you can't drink at 18, but you can hoist a gun around. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. It's so weird.
Yeah, and bringing an assault rifle to a protest, that's not a self-defense weapon.
I agree that was out of line. I don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's an innocent angel or anything, but I feel the verdict of self-defense was justified. But that said, we are here to laugh at it.
Yeah. Look, we could talk about that forever, but yeah.
Anyway, he says, so there must have been evidence of a strong east-west current. No.
Suggests that there is a
Why?
current that is carrying the fossils, the organisms that are going to become fossils, long distances, and it's following latitude lines. When you add that together with evidence from sedimentology of the direction of currents, you find that these fossils have actually been transported long distances along latitude lines from the east to the west, consistently across this flood fossil zone.
So is he trying to sort of say why we see displacement of fossils not due to sort of continental drift, but due to currents in the flood? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, he's saying that there is massive displacement when there usually isn't, and it always occurs in a east-west direction, which it doesn't.
That wouldn't
Well,
even make
that
sense.
may be true for the US.
It's just not true.
Oh, okay.
And like he talks about using sedimentology to figure out current direction. Now that is something we can do. I have done that.
Right.
But the direction it indicates is very dependent on the area.
Hmm.
For example, I did this kind of thing in Wyoming. I measured currents from a big river that was heading straight south. Did the same up in Wisconsin. There was a current heading straight east. Like they're all over the place because rivers and streams and ocean currents have been all over the place in history.
Mm-hmm.
He is just wrong.
Right.
Observation is that footprints are found in among these fossils, and there's two characteristics that are common with these characteristics. First, that they're found in or were formed in water, not exposed in the atmosphere, and secondly, that the footprints are found below the body fossils. So, for example, here we've got some footprints in a sandstone in the Grand Canyon. There's a little bit of an outline of the little guy. It's basically a labyrinthodont footprint, a type of amphibian. You've got several of them here, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's the trackway of the little fella. And the direction of trackway is indicated by those prints that I pointed out, but the individual prints are actually faced at a slightly different angle than the trackway is. So he seems to be walking kind of cockeyed to the direction of the trail, which suggests that there is a current of water. Water is moving along and pushing him. This is probably not in wind situations. It's got to be in water. Since this particular animal.
Yeah.
Really?
So he's presenting a possibility that is a possibility.
Or the rock just got distorted?
Or that it was an inclined surface.
Yeah.
You mean the world wasn't level before the flood?
No, it's weird. Things like rivers and swamps have banks.
What?
Yeah.
Like, oh boy.
Wow. Okay.
Like I could be wrong, but it looks like the footprints are like coming out towards the camera, and that indicates that these are casts of the prints. Meaning that the animal would have been on the other side of the rock face when it was making these prints. So these have definitely been moved for sure. Like it's
a very low-lying animal, so the evidence is that there must be a water current that is causing him to put orient his feet upstream so that he doesn't slide away, so that he isn't washed away, and then make his way across the current at an angle.
Why didn't it wash away the tracks?
Right?
I don't understand.
Yeah, there's a lot here.
I just don't understand. How did you tell it was water? Like, he just seems to claim stuff without any basis for it whatsoever. And it seems to be, well, how could this fit into the flood story? Like how can we fit this in? Oh, well, water could have pushed again. I suppose so, but what evidence do you have that that was in fact the case? Besides, hey, you've got a Bible that says something.
Yeah.
We need to make it true no matter what we have to do to, reality.
Yeah, his MO in this whole thing just seems to be provide an explanation that works with the Bible without providing justification for the explanation. That's essentially all he does.
the type of current that animals experienced. If we look at dinosaur prints, for example, we find that the quality of the dinosaur prints suggests that they were formed underwater. There are some...
What?
No. No.
This is what I mean. Like,
I
don't
want to see
understand.
footprints underwater. I mean, I've been on beaches and things and left footprints underwater. They don't even resemble footprints as soon as you lift your foot up, let alone as soon as
Right.
one tide goes by or something.
They
Yeah.
don't stay
Also-
there as well.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You see this right here?
Oh, we're not going Paluxy River, are we?
Glen Rose.
Oh, that's the Paluxy River, right?
I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah, excavated from the bed of the Paluxy River in Texas. Oh, it absolutely is. Oh, I hate you. I hate you, Wise, which is,
You know, these guys.
it's not human footprints. It's dinosaur footprints that have collapsed, and they don't even look that much like human footprints. Like, seriously.
Yeah. For the record, we do have dinosaur prints that were made underwater, but they're not like terrestrial prints at all. Like they're usually like scratch marks from the claws digging into like a riverbed or something as they swim. And like the Glen Rose the Glen Rose tracks, we know that those were deposited in a floodplain, like a tidal flat. We know the exact environment.
And just because there has been flooding somewhere doesn't mean there was flooding everywhere. That's the thing. Like, you can't just claim, hey, there's a global flood because a flood happened somewhere.
Yeah, we know what a flood looks like. We don't have evidence of a flood all over the earth.
It's also been observed for a very long time that dinosaur prints seem to lack tail drags. You've got the prints of the dinosaurs, but you rarely get a drag of a tail. I have seen a couple tail drags. The one I've seen actually in person in the field is one where it's clear that the animal threw his tail down as he was falling, because then it's followed by a body print. Usually, however, the tail is not on the ground. It's not preserved. So it either suggests that dinosaurs always kept their tails above the ground, which seems a little odd, or the footprints are being deposited in water and the tails are being suspended by the water. I think the evidence is for the latter, which suggests that most dinosaur prints are actually made underwater. Furthermore, a second observation.
What? His own thing shows the tail is elevated. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Your own diagram shows it.
For the record, in case anyone's curious, we know that almost no dinosaurs dragged their tails. They were not lizards.
Right, and your own picture just shows an elevated tail, which is the case for sort of most raptors and most
Just
dinosaurs.
about every dinosaur.
Yeah, I think did the sauropods drag their tail?
No, they wouldn't have. I can't think of a dinosaur that would have habitually dragged its tail, unless its tail was broken at the base.
Yeah, the sauropods didn't, did they?
Nope.
No, and stuff like the T-Rex and things like that certainly didn't. Spinosaurs didn't.
Nope.
So you've made a faulty assumption about dinosaurs and said, because my faulty assumption isn't coming up, then the flood must... Oh, wow, okay. Sir, you are an idiot. I think some of them used them for balance, didn't they? Like the iguanosaurs
many
and
of them
things
did,
like
yeah.
that. Yeah, they'd put it down for balance kind of thing when they were stretching up.
Oh, you're saying they would set them down for balance?
Yes.
Oh, like self-tripod kind of deal? Like kangaroos do.
Only in
but
specific,
kangaroos...
only in very specific animals. Like we do have we have some evidence that might have happened with some of the long-necked dinosaurs.
Yeah.
But otherwise, no. Most other animals or most other dinosaurs had short enough tails that they would have had to really hurt their spines in order to get their tail to rest on the ground normally.
Yeah, but kangaroos, that's probably not a very good description. Their tails do drag on the ground when they're wandering around, like when they're walking, kind of thing. When they're hopping in full motion, like when they're doing the long distance hop, they're above. But when they're sort of just walking, kind of thing, because they kind of amble around on all fours as well. They're like lean over and kind of amble around. They're on the ground.
Yeah, I'm just trying to.
Let me see if I can find a good diagram.
And also, kangaroos can also take their entire weight on their tail and literally kick you with both legs in the chest.
Yeah, good point. I've seen that in video clips.
Just FYI, I have been kicked like that by a kangaroo, and it was not fun. It was like a couple of iron bars being hit with a couple of iron bars, and that was not a particularly big kangaroo. That was a very small kangaroo.
All right.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna show the for the you're right. Kangaroos are extremely specialized.
Mm-hmm.
But like right here, we have an okay diagram of an Allosaurus. Its muscles.
That's horrifying.
Well, the big thing is its tail muscles went into the legs. They were a major. Actually, the legs are really weird for muscles, but the leg muscles connected to the tail to not only help balance, but also just to power the legs. This was the main strategy for a lot of dinosaurs. So if their tails did drag along the ground, it would have really messed up their stride.
So
they would elevate their heads, making sort of the way that they preyed on things completely. It would be weird, right? It would be sort of, in order to keep their mouth forward, their tails have to be elevated. So that would be weird.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a counterweight kind of system rather than more like a.
Right.
Well, I mean, a cattail is for balance, but it doesn't really counterweight anything.
Yeah, it's not a stability by connecting with the ground. It's more stability by a sort of opposing weight kind of thing. Like when a kangaroo, like what you did say is correct. When a kangaroo is in full hop, its tail is up in order to balance it out, kind of thing, so it can maintain that head forward position. So that is 100% true.
Yeah. Funny enough, birds didn't really need this counterweight as much because they can usually just spread out their wings to help keep their body up.
I was actually just thinking how, looking at the musculature, he really resembles a chicken, except for the tail. And I'm like, how did the chickens get rid of the tail?
For the record, the legs are a little chunky.
For sure.
It's thick. It's a thick dino.
Yeah, it's a little thicker than it should be here. But
okay,
what a lot of birds did. Trying to think, make sure I got this right. So as time went on, the tail shrunk down. As a lot of them grew tail feathers that could be used to help balance and control themselves in flight. Turns out you don't want a long, heavy thing hanging off your rear end when you're flying. Go figure. So what a lot of birds did was their muscles shifted forwards. So it was more based on the very base of the tail and the hip bones. Some of the muscle, a lot of birds also really shrunk the femur here and became more dependent on movement in the second portion of the leg away from the body.
Yeah, I've also noticed from eating a number of birds over the years that there's a lot more muscle mass in the wing area. Once you are flight capable, a lot of the muscle moves forward. Also, the head has a lot less weight because they get smaller and closer in. And so, lots of little changes over time. Yeah,
birds also switch to having, like, in predatory ones, a lot bigger bills than their bones would suggest, because keratin is very lightweight. And it grows really easily. Do you say you'll be right back, Mark?
I think he did.
Ah, okay. I guess we can take a short break. We've been going for a bit over an hour. Well, you doing anything interesting tonight, Ember?
Oh, I'm working on all kinds of things. Right now, the reason I've got my camera off is because I need my computer's keyboards and things. I am. The main thing that's bugging me right at the moment is I'm trying to get the files together for the virtual reality recreation of Forrest's stage show from the Comic Con, but I can only find 2 of the 3 files so far, and it's bugging the hell out of me.
Interesting.
Oh, sorry
Yeah.
about that.
You're fine. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Ooh, just had a really nice back crack.
Nice.
Oh, yeah, I should probably share my screen again so we can get started.
Possibly. You don't have to wait for me. That's okay. Thank you
I
anyway.
figure might as well. Entire screen, share audio. There we are.
Woo.
All right. So, footprints before bodies.
With footprints is when you find a given organism in the fossil record, typically you'll find his footprints before you find his body fossils, before you find his bones, or before you find his shells. For example, when you first find trilobites in the fossil record at the base of the Cambrian, the very oldest rocks that contain animal fossils, you don't find the shells of the trilobites, you find the footprints, what's called Cruziana. In the lower left there, we have a picture of Cruziana footprints. They're the little trekways that little guys make. You have to go up these stratigraphic columns some distance, in some cases several dozens of feet, to finally get the first shells. And these shells are made of calcium carbonate. I mean, these shells are pretty solid. They're made of limestone. It should be easy to preserve them if they were there. Yet what we have are footprints that occur for a number of layers before we finally get the bodies.
Okay. So, first off, trilobites, I don't believe, are the only animals that could create Cruziana. Like, that's just a thing a lot of foraging animals create on the seafloor. And second, how many steps do you think you take during your life?
I don't know.
I bet it's a lot. How many bodies do you leave over the course of your life?
I'm pretty sure that's 1. Okay, so
Yeah.
the average person walks 216,262,500 steps in a lifetime.
Oh,
Okay.
that's why I feel so old. I burned that up a couple
Oh.
weekends.
So I think there might be a slightly higher chance of a footprint being preserved than a body.
What?
Just
Yes.
based on sheer numbers.
That math checks out. I would say that something that is like 216 million. I mean, I don't know how much that is for trilobites. That's for a human. Okay, so just to make that 100% clear.
The trilobites,
trilobites
have
have a
so
lot
many more
legs.
feet. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm right on board with that.
Well, I mean, let's say there's like a 1 in a million chance of an organism leaving a fossil behind. So humans would, on average, leave about 200 fossil footprints behind if we walked on dirt.
Ooh, now I'm curious where my 200 fossils I've left over the course of my life are located.
It's just like, yeah, I wonder why there's more of these than bones. I wonder.
Where we finally get the bodies.
Well, I don't think that's his point. His point is that they're higher up, that the bodies are higher up than the footprints. But if you're thinking about how footprints work, I mean, I don't get his point. It's just, I don't know. It's weird.
Like I said, the footprints that he's talking about for trilobites, more animals than trilobites make those. It's just a thing that happens when creatures forage on the seafloor. And as for dinosaur tracks, like dinosaurs are descended from other reptiles that would have left pretty similar footprints that could be mistaken for dinosaur tracks.
And I guess this was what I was pointing out earlier, that they sort of say it looks like this, so that's what it is. So those tracks may look like trilobite tracks, but you like kind of there's all kinds of creatures that can make tracks like that. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and like the text says on screen, kind of weird that all these footprints are preserved in what are supposed to be flood sediments. That seems a little weird.
Hillhugger makes a really good point too. Other critters usually don't eat the footprints that we leave behind.
True.
Usually, I'm sure there's a few fetishists around somewhere.
Oh, well, I mean,
all right.
Same thing happens with the dinosaurs. The very oldest evidence we have of dinosaurs are footprints. It isn't until later that we get the bones. It would seem, in the face of it, that it would be easier to preserve bones than it would be to preserve footprints, but the fossil record shows footprints before bones.
Okay. Again, other things closely related to dinosaurs. Putting down footprints.
It would seem... I love seem. Like, footprints are negative space, That's what they are. Whereas bones, while they may be physically harder than footprints, they're positive matter deposits made of organic material that other organic material wants to recycle.
Yeah. And, not only that, but, any fossil we find, if it's the earliest of a species we know of, there were definitely ones around before then, even if we can't say how much before then, just because of the sheer statistical unlikeliness that a fossil is made.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest that what this is referring to is that organisms are escaping from a catastrophe. They're running for their life while sedimentation is occurring very rapidly. So you see their escape trackways before you finally get their bodies at a higher level. So the footprints that are formed underwater and formed before the body fossils suggest that we have both terrestrial and marine organisms overwhelmed by this catastrophe, which is consistent with the global flood we have mentioned in Scripture.
But if you think about that, he's trying to say that the footprints that the animals are leaving within their lifetime are forming into fossils before they die, and then like that would be in some incredibly fast fossil formation, right? That would be some insanely fast fossil formations, and all of this underwater. It's with a catastrophe going on underwater, it's so weird. Any movement of water that these animals would had to flee from or die would wipe out those tracks very fast. You don't have, it has to be still water in order for the we're talking about muddy areas and sort of shallow pools kind of thing, not a rolling flood of that's coming through the land. I don't understand how that would work.
He doesn't seem to get, or maybe he's just conveniently forgetting, that floods pick up sediments and move them.
What?
And he mentions later, maybe the flood moves things in a block, one ecosystem moved as a block. Floods don't do that.
Right.
Yeah, like a run-out landslide with one of those stable areas on top that happens one out of every 1,000 landslides.
Just with all the force and even a local flood, it's just a moving blender.
Right. And you've pointed this out to me before. You've educated me on this, Dr. Deino. The Missoula Valley kind of thing. We can see the effects of a sudden flood will have. And that was, as you said, a grinder. It was basically all of these rocks being tossed around, and the water just eroding completely the top layers kind of thing. It's not like we don't know what a flood does. And you're describing the most catastrophic flood event in history, and it has none of the signs that we see of a flood when we know one happens, which is crazy.
It's a magic flood.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
John is asking which organization was this guy with? I forget. Was it AIG? I think this is an
all of
AIG
them.
channel.
Yeah, I think it was CMI actually. Let me check. What's his name? Kurt
Wise.
Kurt Patrick Wise,
Yeah,
Director of
Creation
Creation
Research
Research,
Center. Yeah.
Professor
Okay.
of Natural History at Truett McConnell University in Cleveland, Georgia, and Professor of or Director of Origins Research at Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee, and a few other things.
Ugh.
Yeah, so he does consultancy work for Answers in Genesis, which makes sense, but it's the creation ministry that he's actually part of.
Okay. Okay.
For diversity and stasis before abrupt appearance. The difference between disparity and diversity.
Okay. And here he brings up a slightly more advanced concept. I think he explains it okay, but we'll see.
Diversity is the number of organisms that you have. It's how many different species you have. Disparity is how different those species are. In an evolutionary perspective of things, organisms, in fact, change through time according to an evolutionary tree. New species come in slightly different than species that were already there, gradually branching out, gradually become.
So basically, species creatures diversify as time goes on, and as they diversify, each creature will be more different than others that it's more distantly related to.
Okay, that tracks.
Like all dinosaurs are descended from dinosaurs, but a triceratops is pretty different from a sparrow. There's a lot of disparity because there's been a lot of diversification.
Becoming more and more different from the original species. So in order to create great disparity or difference among and between organisms, you have to actually branch a number of times before you can get there. On the issue of organismal change, evolution, in fact, predicts gradual change of one organism to another. So if A is going to evolve into B and C, you would expect a series of transitions between A and B and A and C. And it would expect that the divergence could be seen between B and C as things go up in these.
So he's just wrong here. We see both. We see both all the time.
In the fossil record. What fossils actually show, though, is not this gradual change and divergence. Fossils show stasis and abrupt appearance, as Stephen Jay Gould used to describe it. And it's not just...
Yeah, extra special stop because he brought up Stephen Jay Gould. I didn't know he studied under him, but...
Can you imagine how disappointed Stephen Jay Gould would be in him? Like, seriously, if you did somebody as a doctoral consultant for this guy and he's just using you to misrepresenting your work. Shame on you, sir. Shame on you.
Yeah. Just for the record, everyone, there are multiple ways evolution can occur. A species can gradually change to another species. This is pretty easy to see in human evolution, where we slowly go from something like a chimp and slowly go towards more human. It can also be a bit more sudden, which usually happens when we have gaps in time where you just don't have a lot preserved. Like as an example, dromaeosaurs, like Velociraptor, they just kind of appear in the fossil record, and we just don't have the rocks that show what they evolved directly from. So we see both kinds.
I can't remember if Gould didn't believe in punctuated equilibrium.
His work punctuated equilibrium.
His work was punctuated equilibrium.
Followed by stability.
Right. So, for instance, sort of the event that killed the dinosaurs, for instance, where sort of only burrowing mammals really, there was other sort of organism that survived, but that's when a change to burrowing mammals was really evident, kind of thing. That's a big change in your fossil record. It would be a marked shift to that organism, kind of thing. So that's where you will see rapid evolutionary change and things like so that's sort of a what is that? That is genetic drift. Essentially, it's a random event that causes very, very fast changes.
Can be. keep in mind we are still talking about geologic time. So
Hmm.
quick
Okay.
might be a couple feet of rock, which would correspond to 1,000,000 years.
Right. That's what I
Could be
mean.
wrong, but I think Gould did a lot of work with horses. And in the horse fossil record, you do see these big jumps because they'll just have like a mutation that makes them a lot better at surviving. And they don't have to change much because of that adaptation until their predators catch up with them. And then you see another sudden shift to get away from the predators again.
Right.
Until you have the modern horse groups.
But if we're missing a few fossils from between that, it might look like that the change was instant, but it's not. It's very, it is gradual, and I think that sort of part of Gould's work was sort of saying, he sort of said, well, punctuated equilibrium and sort of phylogenetic gradualism, this idea of things, they're not mutually exclusive, right?
Yeah.
One can happen
It's a
and the
spectrum.
other can happen. Right, like it's not like, oh well, it has to be one or the other. It depends on the environment and the circumstance and what happens. Like, and there's sort of with punctuated equilibrium, you have these forms that they get to a place where they don't need to, like you have the shark. It's been largely unchanged for millions of years. Like it doesn't need. It is a perfect. I'm using perfect pretty hyperbolically here, but it is an ideal form for what it wants to do, kind of thing. It is very, very well suited for what it's trying to do. So that's where you won't get a lot of evolutionary change because it is surviving so well, or at least it used to before humans came in, I guess.
Actually, fun fact there. What type of shark do you think is the deadliest, just based on how many successful hunts it has?
Oh,
How many successful what now?
hunts?
Successful
Like,
hunts
do you
out
mean
of
of
total
anything?
hunts. Like, say they have
what is the most successful?
like say they have a 40% success rate where all other sharks top out at like 20%.
I am going to
most
go
successful
for the
hunters?
whale shark.
I'll say basking shark.
Okay, predatory shark.
No.
Now we're
Oh,
changing
come on. They just
definitions
open their
again.
mouth and swim forward.
Yes, and they're very, very good at it. And their success rate is amazing because they always catch something. Come on, the
Okay.
whale shark, it's predatory. It preys on krill and plankton.
Okay,
What are you
you're
talking
right.
about? How dare you?
Something that actively hunts.
Okay. I would probably say, I'm going to say the bull shark.
Okay.
I'll go tiger shark just because it popped into my head. Although hammerheads are cool.
It is the
They are
hammerhead.
cool, yeah. It is the hammerhead. Okay, there you go.
Their weird shaped head is just a mass of sensory operations. Like they can, using electro sensing, they can see in front of them with their face. And their eyes provide like 180-degree field of view.
Ha, literal fish eyes.
Yeah.
Like, if they start chasing something, it's almost impossible for it to get away because they know every move it makes.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense. Yeah.
It's true of species, as Stephen Jay Gould argued. It's actually also true of every taxonomic level. Now, I would say this is certainly not something predicted by evolutionary theory, but it is expected with a flood.
Except when Stephen Jay Gould predicted it using evolutionary theory.
Mm-hmm.
The flood. Then we have evidence that the fossils make a gradual transition from low in the sequence to high in the sequence, from sea to land. The only way this can really be shown is if you create a tree of relationship of organisms, look at this tree and predict from it what the order of branching should be. It should be that the tree started down here and made its way out to the final result. So I would expect that the first branches would be the Placozoa and the Porifera in this particular tree. Then we should get the Archaeocyathids. Then we should get the Cnidarians. Then we should get the Ctenophores and so on. This tree allows us to predict an order of branching. When you do that and lay them all out, you find that actually...
Okay, so that was an okay description of a phylogenetic tree. Yeah, the more basal creatures, the ones more towards the base of the tree, are going to diverge first. That is true.
and order of branching. When you do that and lay them all out, you find that actually the order of branching
But
predicted
that
by
doesn't
evolution on the
mean
screen-
that we should see, like, there are some sort of more basal forms that sort of developed past, like, so a sort of less basal form might evolve and then go extinct, and that more basal form might carry past it, right? So
Oh yeah, that happens all the time.
yeah, so I think he's misrepresenting, and this 95% major fossil groups appear randomly respected. Citation needed, please.
Yeah.
I
Define randomly,
right,
because that word can mean a lot of things.
Hmm.
And for
And you
anyone
do
who
get
doesn't-
living.
Go
You do
ahead.
get living fossils. I mean, there's stromatolites in Western Australia. They are from the age of the dinosaurs. They're basically plant rocks, essentially.
We have stromatolites that are over 2 billion years old.
Yeah.
For anyone who's curious what I mean by randomly, if I roll a 6-sided dice, it is completely random if I get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. However, whatever number I get will always be between 1 and 6. It cannot be a 7. So even though what I roll is random, it's not really random because it's within a defined set of numbers.
Yeah. Yep.
So there are degrees of randomness.
And that's sort of, I think there's a problem with the word random and creationists, because they seem to think that evolution is random, and that's just not the case. And I love your dice example, because they sort of say, hey, mutations are random, so the process is random. It's like, well, hang on a second. If you roll random numbers, like on your dice from 1 to 6, and then you remove all of the 1s, and then all of the 2s, and then all of the, then it's becoming less and less random as you're removing numbers. So while the mutations are random, the process isn't random. It's determined.
Or, like, another example I really like for that specific example is, let's just say I take a scoop of sand and I pour it through a colander or a sieve. Anything that falls through survives, makes it into the next generation where I do the same thing again.
Right.
But you'll have some that don't make it through, either because they're too large or because they settle on the metal, something like that.
Yep.
It is random, quote unquote, if they survive, but it's not really. There's some that just can't survive, while others die by random chance.
It's random what grains of sand that you picked in the first place, because you took a random scoop of sand, right? That is random. But it's not random which ones made it through that sieve.
Bingo.
That is determined by the size of the sieve.
Yep. Especially since you can just keep doing it with different sizes of sieve.
Right.
Or different hole sizes.
doesn't really correspond with the order of branching that you find in the fossil record. So really, there's nothing to explain in the fossil record. It looks like randomness, except for the fact that the 5% that does seem to correspond happens to be in groups where evolution says this group evolved from sea to land. So, for example, it says that the plants evolved from the sea to land, and the plant groups seem to come into the fossil.
How about the ones that evolved from land to sea?
I'm looking at you, Wales.
A lot of creatures that went from land to sea.
And I mean, whales still have the sort of vestigial hip bones that they used to have. Like, they've still essentially got rear legs, but the legs are so atrophied to just be a couple of nubs, basically.
And a lot of them can have a mutation where they will grow rear fins.
Ooh.
Yeah, you can see it on a dolphin. It makes it look just like an ichthyosaur.
Right.
Which, I mean, here, actually, I kind of want to show that. Rear fins. Oh, come on, Google. You can behave.
So apparently whale and dolphin fetuses also show signs of hind protrusions, but they generally disappear before birth.
Yep, they are reabsorbed into the body.
Yep. So that's embryology, right? It's showing evolution.
Yeah.
The recapitulation thing. Yeah, they only really still exist as like an anchor point for things to latch onto during construction.
Yeah. But here is a dolphin with hind flippers.
Ooh.
Yep.
It's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's especially cool because while we don't really have any reason to expect anything other than flippers, seeing that when there is that throwback so that hind limbs emerge, they come out as flippers is good to know.
Mm-hmm.
So do you know what that's called? That's got a very specific name when that happens.
Oh man, I think it's something.
I know it.
Atapomorphy. Is it a retro?
No, atavism.
retromorphy?
Atavism.
Yeah. Atavism.
Yes, I've heard
Okay.
that before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
couldn't
what does
remember what it is.
the dolphins with remains of legs? So I found an article by Ken Ham on it.
Oh no.
Right. So answers in Genesis. What do they have to say about it? Or we can go on as news reports. So no one has to be very careful. According to Fox News, so they're basically saying, hey, it's just so we know for sure this dolphin had an extra set of fins, not legs in brackets. Yeah, thanks, Ken. They said it could be the remains of back legs because of their obvious evolutionary bias.
Yeah, that's the only thing it could be.
Yep, and Ken has no bias whatsoever, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're basically saying, hey, it's fins, it's not legs, you know, that's sort of weird. He's pointing out how like the shoulders of the fins of the dolphins are like mammals kind of thing. Well, yeah. Land dwelling mammals, sorry, yeah. Yes, they are. But there's significant differences in both. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and the pelvic bones appear to support reproductive organs. Yeah, but they don't need to. That's the thing. Like,
there
would be other ways to do that.
I am curious, though, if, like, baby whales still feel the need to go through the gap in the hips.
I believe... Well, I could be wrong. I don't think most whales have a pelvic bar. So the pubis bone, I don't think they have a pubis.
That
If they do,
wise.
it's very much shrunken.
Maybe you can watch Hovens making babies and find out. Like maybe you can do that.
I'd rather not. If it's all the same deal.
Okay, I'm looking up diagrams. Don't think I'm going to show them on stream, but
No, probably not.
yeah, the pelvis in most modern whales is completely detached from the vertebral column. It's
Gotcha.
essentially just a couple tiny bones left over.
Mhm.
So I imagine that it goes through the path where they used to be, but it's not really passing between much of anything anymore.
Mhm.
It's got to make childbirth slightly easier. Or calf birth, kid birth.
Well, I mean,
Whatever the hell
calf
they call
birth, but I mean, keep in mind, like the babies still weigh usually like over a ton, I think.
The worst is kiwis. I feel so sorry for those little guys. Their egg is almost as big as they are. It's nuts.
Yeah.
Like kiwi birds in New Zealand. Oh boy, their rib cage has to like change shape in order to accommodate their eggs. It's.
I forget what bird it is, but I know there is an even more extreme example.
I thought the kiwi had the largest egg to body size ratio.
Or I'm pretty sure there is a more extreme example. I can't remember it off the top of my head.
We're bringing up all kinds of weird random shit today, ain't we?
Well, while you look that up, I'm gonna go ahead and keep playing. 'cause
No, it's the Kiwi. Egg to body size.
it is the Kiwi? Okay.
Yeah.
Record in the same order that evolution says it they should. The land animals are thought to have evolved from the sea, and they come in the order that evolution predicts they should come in. So it appears that there's evidence, for the most part, of randomness, but the only pattern that really has to be explained is a sea to land transition, which is what I'd expect with a flood. A flood, in fact, buries things in the ocean first, and then eventually transgresses onto the land, taking things off of the land.
Shouldn't the things in the ocean be better equipped to survive the flood?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like George Carlin pointed out that what the flood does nothing to like ducks. They floated down here, now they float up here.
Or like whales, they'd be gobbling up all the dead fish from the change in salt water, but the whales wouldn't be bothered.
Yeah, dolphins wouldn't be bothered. So the ichthyosaurs, there's no reason for them to go extinct.
Can be tested. As a matter of fact, I became interested in one of those groups that seems to correspond between evolution and the order in the fossil record, and that's the classes of plants. This is the order of branching predicted by evolution, and you can put numbers on these things. This is the actual order.
Okay, I left this in. Just the way it is here, this is one of the most confusing diagrams I have ever seen.
I don't know what he's trying to point to. Is that
so? These are classes of plants. Those are the blue words. And the width of the green is supposed to be how many species are present in those groups.
But that doesn't really matter. It matters where they occur, not how many they are, right?
Well, yeah, that's one. But also just, why is it like this? Why are there no axes? This isn't a graph. This is a weird modern art project with some words attached.
It seems very abstract, doesn't it?
Yeah, like if you had this in a paper with no guide, you'd be laughed out of the field.
Well, I mean, he is doing sort of presentations to lay people, so to be charitable, I think that I've seen worse presentations to lay people, to be honest with you. But look, I thought it would be talking about the depth they were at, because that's what he was talking about. Why has he suddenly moved to the amount of plants there are? I don't understand that.
Yeah, there's a lot to not understand here.
Order of first appearance, or actually when these groups come in the fossil record. Again, looking at rocks from the bottom to the top, the bottom rocks being the oldest, the upper rocks being the youngest. We start out with and the width of this thing on the screen would in fact be how many species, how many groups, how many how many species there are of a particular group. So at the very first, the fossil plants are represented by only a single species. With time, the number of plants increases. And then how many of those plants are in each of the groups is indicated here. And from this, we can see in the fossil record what order these groups first appeared in. You can compare the order.
Yeah, but diversity is, yes, you expect a lot of diversity the more it sort of stands out. But that doesn't mean that one plant can't sort of be overwhelmingly successful in its area. I don't understand how. It's like he doesn't understand evolution at all. I've figured it out. He doesn't understand evolution in the slightest. That's what he doesn't understand.
It really seems
I've cracked the code.
Or shown by the fossil record, and you find a tremendous correspondence. It's 99% of the pattern can be explained by evolution, or putting it another way, the plants do seem to come into the fossil record in the same order as evolution. However, in addition to looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, you could also ask a different question. What order would you predict them to come in if you arrange them from sea to land? What if you considered the plants that have to have standing water to reproduce at one end of the spectrum, and then put them side by side as per how much water they need to survive, all the way up to animals that can survive even in, let's say, desert environments? When you put them in an order of what might be called terrestriality, from non-terrestrial to terrestrial, you get a pattern like you have at the right. Now, the pattern at the right looks very similar to the pattern at the left, extremely similar.
Yeah, but the problem is that none of these plants can survive spending 7 months at the bottom of kilometers high water. The light doesn't make it down there.
Don't you worry, he has an answer for that.
Okay. Well, as long as it's not,
I'm excited.
If it's floating islands of plants, I'm going to be so mad. Seriously.
I am sad that Beamsy is not here, because he would explode.
I'm placing
much as I
bets
like
on
BC.
glowing sunstones at the 2 kilometer down mark.
Glowing sunstones. All right. Well, your explanation's a lot better than mine. I got it.
But from this, you can then predict a pattern of branching that evolution would predict and a pattern of branching that ecology would predict if these things were arranged from sea to land. And you can compare those and do more statistics. You basically get the same pattern. In other words, evolution could predict the pattern, but also another thing that could produce the pattern is if the plants were actually lined up from sea to land with increasing terrestriality. Is there anything that makes sense of that?
Are you psychic, Mark?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Floating forest theory.
You know,
Oh,
just
my
like we
brain.
see today because it's so common and easy to do.
Oh.
They
Well, I
tend to
discovered a theory a
congregate.
number of years ago to in fact explain that because of my experience once on a floating bog, on a quaking bog, one of these vegetation mats that grows out over a lake from the shore, which is a wild experience. I realized that in that situation, the plants in the floating bog were arranged from the open water to the land in increasing terrestriality. That makes sense. The plants that were growing out over the water, they needed water. They lived in water continuously. The plants that were on the shore didn't need that much water, so they were arranged in a water to land increasing terrestriality order. And so I thought, well, maybe these plants in the fossil record were arranged in the same way.
That's on still water, Kurt. Kurt, you can't claim that it was a roiling flood that did all of these like geological movements, and it was still. You can't do that.
Oh, don't worry. He has an explanation for that.
Oh, I hate you so much. I hate you so much. This is like, you know, you can't use catastrophe and floating forest in the same context. Like, you can't do that. Okay.
Oh, it gets better
so
though, because if he's supporting full-on terrestrial life in the center part of these mats, away as far away from the water, that means that there's lots of land animals and shit in there too, because those not only could they have been there, they have to be there because they're part of the whole of the ecosystem. The central trees and shit, they won't survive without the animals playing their role in the ecosystem.
Mark, what if I told you that these floating bogs lined the Atlantic Ocean before the flood?
I would say, sir, you need to seriously learn some science, sir. You are tripping right now. Like, seriously, what is wrong with you?
The
You might
entire
wanna remember
Appalachian
that
mountain
answer.
chain. The whole of the mountains.
No.
was all
Floating
bogs.
forest by a quaking bog. So I reconstructed a forest by basically taking the order in the fossil record and then bringing it straight up to draw a picture of this floating forest. I proposed that there was a floating forest on the pre-flood world's oceans that's the size of a continent. Very large. North America.
What?
Huge. The main trees of this, in fact, produce the coal. So
What?
States, Europe, and Asia. That's a lot of coal. That's a lot of forest.
The
So we have
trees produce the coal?
This.
Well, I don't know how they think coal got there, because coal takes ages to form. It needs to be compressed, sort of carbon.
You see, Mark, it was buried by the flood.
What?
I wish I
It
was
was it was
joking.
floating on the flood, but also buried by the. Oh, okay. This is fine. This makes
How
perfect
could
sense.
it have existed a continent-size thing with coal in it if the flood hadn't happened yet?
Well, you see, it was floating on the Atlantic Ocean and then destroyed by the flood, and that created all the coal in Europe and the eastern United States.
Oh,
There you go.
No, that's not. No.
That's why those are the only two
theory.
regions on Earth with coal, right?
Yeah,
This floating forest.
I definitely did see it in Wyoming.
It's almost like you would need to have an entire continent, like above sea level or something, in order to. Yeah. Weird.
But that would mean that the water would have to be still in the Atlantic before the flood.
Yeah, it would have to be, wouldn't it?
Well,
Because these
the
floating
Atlantic was
forests, they don't form on sort of even sort of lakes where there is some current movement. They need absolutely still water in order to form. So a bog.
Hill Hugger is asking how many fields of science will Kurt have to apologize to by the end of this video?
Oh, they need to apologize to him because they're all wrong because the Bible is correct. Or more specifically, Kurt, with his PhD level interpretation of how the Bible has to work, he's deducing and inducing the physics of Bibleness. So he has the real truth, even though none of this shit is in the scriptures.
Yeah. Newton really should have consulted the Bible. He should have been a Christian.
Yeah,
Same for Lord Kelvin.
Just imagine how much more Newton could have discovered if he didn't waste so much time on the pesky alchemy and whatnot.
Yeah.
Forest would have existed in the world before the flood, would have floated on the oceans before the flood, would have been quite fine until it came to the flood. When the flood came along, waves would tend to break up this forest, and they break it up from the outside of the forest towards the middle. And so the first things that would be torn off and buried would be the organisms at the edge of the forest, and then it would work its way in towards the center of the forest. This would actually explain the order of appearance of the major groups of plants, which is what I was interested in the first place.
Yeah, I get you.
You have dishonored your family.
Forest theory explains.
What was that?
You have dishonored your family. You must commit seppuku.
I wouldn't stop him.
The increasing terrestriality of plants in the fossil record. But it explains another thing, too. I realized that in the floating bogs that I had been on, the plants that grow out over the water were very small plants. Whereas as you get further and further away from the water towards the shore, the plants get progressively taller. So there's actually an increase.
Yeah, how many trees were there, mate? How many trees were in these floating forests?
Don't worry, Mark. He'll get to that.
The increase in terrestriality in modern quaking bogs. There's also an increase in size corresponding to the increase in terrestriality in the fossil record. So the floating forest theory explains both of those. Plus, it explains the fact that most of these fossil plants are extinct or near extinct. And it makes sense because if in fact there was a floating forest before the flood, and the flood destroyed that floating forest, it's unlikely that the floating forest would ever be able to regrow on the rough oceans following the flood. The other observation that is consistent with this theory. And
can I just point out that before the fountains of the deep broke open, the Atlantic Ocean was salt water. So how did these floating forests cope with the salt?
It was a salt bog. Yeah. Just deal with it.
I was always bothered by when I saw
Unhappy
through the years is that many of these plants are actually preserved in marine sediments. They're not found in terrestrial sediments, the sediments on the land. They were found in marine sediments, sometimes intermixed with other fossils that would indicate a marine situation.
I regret it. I should have put together a little slideshow of terrestrial preserved plants. Because, believe it or not, folks, he's entirely wrong.
What?
No.
You're kidding.
Like, do we have plants that were deposited in marine settings? Yes, we definitely do. We have lots of them on land, though. We have so many on land. That's literally what most paleosols are. Like, it's a soil horizon that was composed of mostly plant matter.
So I used to ask my professors, well, how is it that this particular fossil ends up in a marine environment? He says, well, it floats down the river and ends up being deposited out there in the ocean, being carried there by the rivers. The problem there is that in the marine realm, those organisms at the bottom of the ocean do a very good job of destroying whatever comes down the streams. We just don't find fossils like that in those kinds of environments. We just don't find fossils like that.
As you might guess, those are all things that were discovered in those environments.
Right.
That exact environment.
That's an amazing fossil.
Oh, it is gorgeous.
Yeah,
This is
amazing.
Borealopelta. We know what color it was. It is that well preserved.
That's cool.
Yeah. Actually, I do kind of want to show that.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Gorgeous animal.
I mean, I was hoping for purple, but that's cool too.
Another thing it explains, though, is the fact that some of these plants are actually very strange. If you look at...
Yeah, there's your
You're very
explanation,
strange.
Mark. The trees were hollow, filled with air.
What?
Oh.
He also fails
Has he
to
got
understand
any
they
evidence
aren't
for this?
trees. So he is right. They were hollow. They were not trees. He keeps calling them trees. They were essentially, think of them like giant reeds.
Kind of sort of like the giant bamboos that grow to the sizes of trees and things.
Exactly. Actually, yeah, a lot like bamboo.
Yeah.
A lot like it.
A cross-section of the trees found in the center of this floating forest, in other words, the trees of the coal forest, you find that they're basically hollow. And back in 1981, Joachim Scheven in Germany proposed that these plants, just the center plants of the what I'm calling the floating forest, in fact floated. He proposed this. I didn't know about this when I proposed my theory of the floating forest. He had a number of years proposed this for just some of the trees, namely the large trees of the coal forest. Another thing this theory explains is coal, at least the kind of coal we have in the eastern United States, Europe, and western Russia. According to the typical explanation, coal is made in what's called a coal swamp. There are supposedly trees living in this swamp. They're dropping their material, their leaves and branches down into the swamp. It is because of the nature of the swamp, it isn't decomposing terribly well and accumulating as a layer of peat.
Supposedly. We definitely don't have peat bogs today.
No. Nope, no one's ever heard of those.
Never. The
Bottom of the swamp, peat that will then later be formed into coal. Now I'm representing a coal seam by these rectangles of blue. Imagine the blue rectangles continuing to the right and to the left indefinitely. These are layers of coal. Typically, a coal layer has a very flat top, so I am representing it by a exactly rectangular thing, and that's because coal seams typically do have a very flat top. They also typically have a flat base, quite strikingly flat base, and sometimes the coal is divided into separate layers by what...
Okay. Can either of you think of a reason why something deposited in a very calm, dead environment might deposit flatly?
What do you mean? Because it's put under pressure?
Why would the layers turn out flat if there's like no currents or anything? Like,
well, that's how sedimentary deposits work. Like they're just like
there's no disruption.
Well,
yeah.
Deposits in water will generally be flat, right? Like because they just
flatter, yeah. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand a lot. This is a little aggravating, to be honest with you. Because just with the absence of a current, the swamp is going to lay down things pretty uniformly. There's no real disparity in the water direction or temperature or flow, anything. So everything's just going to fall and get kind of balanced out by the water. And he doesn't seem to get this.
Have come to be called benches by the coal miners. These benches will contain, for example, a layer of marine clay with sometimes fossils in it that are often extensive. You can find these things across counties and so on. Inside the coal itself, Steve Austin, who's a creationist who received his doctorate on coal in 1979, studied the Kentucky 12 coal in Kentucky, and discovered when he looked carefully at the coal itself that he could identify chunks of bark in the coal and could follow them for a long enough distance to realize that the chunks of bark were dinner plate sized, typically, in the coal, and that most of the coal was made of, in fact, bark. Okay, so those are the characteristics of coal. He also observed in the Kentucky 12 these general observations: flat top, flat bottom, flat benches. He actually had 2 or 3 benches in the Kentucky 12 coal with only a few centimeters of clay in the benches. There's a problem with this description of coal, and as it corresponds to the swamp theory for its origin. Here's a picture of a drain swamp in Nova Scotia with Steve Austin, the one who studied the coal, there checking it out. It's the dark stuff above that is the actual peat from a drain swamp. The stuff down below, the lighter stuff down below are rocks that swamp was sitting on. Notice there's some white things sticking out of the peat. These white things are actually roots of plants that were living in the swamp. So you might expect that in swamps like have been described as forming coal, that you should have a lot of roots. If you look at the actual material there between the roots, Steve describes it as kind of like coffee grounds. You can't find large pieces of anything. You can't find a branch, you can't find leaves, you can't find bark fragments. Usually the largest fragments you see are coffee ground size, sometimes even just fine coffee ground size. This makes sense. It's the roots running through all of this stuff, breaks the stuff up. There is some decomposition that occurs because of bacteria in here. And so basically, usually what you would expect in a swamp situation is that you're not going to be able to preserve large pieces, recognizable pieces of the original trees.
So in the specific swamps he's working with, they were very small fragments of plant matter.
Which makes sense because, I mean, just referencing modern ecosystems, swamps tend to wipe out the trees in the areas where the swamp becomes swampy.
A lot of them, yeah.
Yeah.
And he brings up that there were no sticks. That probably indicates no nearby trees, really. So if you have a ton of small plants in the area, do you think that might deposit small shavings and stuff like that?
Well, I don't get how this is evidence for a flood. I don't understand why the flood supports this over sort of the peat peat bogs kind of thing.
It really isn't. So I guess a bit of spoilers. He's going to try to tie this into a alternative hypothetical explanation for all of these coal layers where they were formed from floating forests, where the bark just settled beneath the floating forest.
But what I don't get is how. You don't just get sort of plant matter turning into coal. That's not just how it works. It needs to be subjected to pressure and heat for that to happen. So I don't understand.
He just says they would have stacked up beneath the floating forest. That's all he really gives.
It's not. You know what? Why even stop at floating forest? Let's take the hollow trees, and since they're on top of water, why don't they do some kind of enzymatic hydrolysis and fill their stems with hydrogen, and then we can have a flying forest?
Don't give them any ideas, Ember. I don't give them ideas. They will probably, if they're willing to run the ice canopy, that an ice canopy existed all over the globe at one point, the flying forest isn't exactly, out of their reach. So
yeah. Well, that's why we don't have any, hydrogen flying trees today, is because once the ice canopy was gone, they all lifted off and they're no longer around.
Yeah, they flew away from the flat Earth.
Yep.
Yeah, I mostly just paused here to bring up that point. A lot of these tiny flecks are going to be from tiny plants. So that might be a reason why we don't have these big dinner plate sized chunks in these bogs.
No lily pads today.
Just to put that in a sense of scale, you'll see.
Which makes the observation of bark chunks in the coal, pieces of bark in the coal, recognizable pieces of bark in the coal, not explained by a swamp.
Yeah, quick reminder of the size of these quote-unquote trees. In Minecraft, for easy comparison.
In addition, we have...
Okay.
So can you see why this might leave a slightly bigger fragment than a tiny horsetail?
Yeah.
But why though?
The problem creating let's say a flat base. In this particular situation, we have a relatively flat base because it's sitting directly on solid rock. But if it isn't sitting on rock, the roots of the plant should reach down underneath the coal, underneath the organic matter, and root themselves in the clay underneath. Underneath these coals, almost always is a clay, or what used to be a clay before the coal was formed. And yet we do not find roots reaching down from the coal into the clay underneath. Furthermore, if it did that, it would make the surface uneven. Where the trees stick up out of it, it would be uneven compared to the areas between trees. But coal has a very flat base, very typically. What about the flat top? I asked about this when I was in school. I asked my professors, how in the world do we get the flat top on the coal? They said, well, I lived in Illinois and went to school in Illinois, so I didn't know much about hurricanes, so this answer satisfied me for the moment until I actually saw this. They said, well, a hurricane comes through and destroys the swamp and levels the swamp, and that produces the flat top of the coal. Oh, okay. Until I saw the result of a hurricane in South Carolina, and actually saw an instance where a coastal swamp was hit by a hurricane, picked up out of it was destroyed. I mean, just devastated, completely destroyed. And a lot of the debris of the swamp was dumped on a city that was just slightly inland of that. Visiting that locality, there is no way you describe this swamp as shaved flat. There were trees broken off at various heights. There were trees turned down with the roots sticking up in the air. Branches and trunks are laying in every which direction. It was impossible to walk through this stuff. It was by no means flat. By no means.
So you came through right after it happened, and it was all chaos. What would it look like a decade later, or a century later? And let's say no one had taken root. You think it might appear a little flatter, especially as all kinds of sediment gets deposited on top of the downed trees?
But that like that implies that there's more time after the thing happens, and we know from the Bible that that's just not the case. As soon as the flood was over, the world was back in perfect shape, just like it was before, virtually overnight, so that they could get to work rebuilding, towers and things.
Except for the Ice Age.
Shh. Secrets.
I don't see any way you could get the swamp shaved off to create at the end a flat top for your coal. But let's say
argument from personal incredulity.
Somehow there's a way to shave off this thing. And
that's just an argument from personal incredulity.
Now, let's talk about how you produce these benches. You got a flat layer of coal, so now you've got an inch of clay comes in and covers the coal. Okay, good. Now, we got coal on top of it, so we're going to have to bring a swamp back in again. We're going to have to bring in trees back in to produce the next layer of coal. How do the trees root in 1 inch of clay without disrupting the clay? How do you get the plants that are going to drop
Who said it was trees?
Who said it was trees to start with? Like, smaller plants would appear first and die and build up an organic layer that larger plants would then root into.
And more sediments deposited, because we don't have to go, how did this sediment get there in the next, 20 years or 100 years or so? We can say, hey, over, 50,000 years, sediment was deposited. And then the next plants come in. Like, your idea that it has to be this timeline, sort of, you're not thinking in millions of years. He's thinking in thousands of years.
That's what he's trying for, yeah.
Is he even thinking in thousands? He might be thinking in decades.
Yeah. No, I get you, yeah.
And, like, my big question, like, he already just said, like, once these would have been disturbed by the flood, they wouldn't have taken root again. So what's his explanation for the clay layer in between and then more of them? What's his explanation if a floating bog couldn't have reappeared there? I think he's ignoring his own argument here.
To grow in a layer of clay without disturbing the layer of clay at all. The layer of clay has a flat bottom and a flat top. It's undisturbed. There's no way you can explain the features of coal by this swamp theory. That was the conclusion Steve Austin came to with the Kentucky 12 coal. And so Steve, in trying to understand that particular coal, proposed a floating log mat idea. An idea that the logs of the trees of the coal forest, and remember those trees are hollow, basically, mostly bark, not much of anything else, that these trees, these logs with bark on them, were floating in large numbers on a body of water. They floated against one another, rubbed against one another, and peeled off their bark. The bark floated down to the bottom got waterlogged and floated down to the bottom, and accumulated as a layer of bark on the bottom of this body of water. That would explain why you got a bunch of pieces of bark to make up the coal. Also, if you started out this whole story with a flat layer of mud at the bottom of this body of water, and then this log mat blew in by the wind over that mud, dropped a bunch of bark on top of it, it would explain why the base of that pile of bark was flat, because the original layer of mud was flat. Produced your layer of bark, then let's say the wind blew that log mat away, it's leaving a pretty flat layer of bark there, an inch or so, whatever you want, of clay can come in over the top of it, mud can come in over the top, and then the log mat can blow back over the top, once again, and produce another layer of bark.
I'm sorry, but
man.
it sounds like he's trying to describe that floating log mats do kind of drive-by bombing runs of one specific area in a catastrophe flood that's kilometers high, and all of these bark shavings from the logs just happen to hit this one area. Like, what are we talking about here?
But by the way, that citation there, does the name Stephen Austin mean anything to you guys?
Yeah, it's
Stone
Stone
Cold?
Cold Stephen Austin. Yeah.
Okay. Just
Y-
curious.
The guy who is buddies with The Rock.
No, he's a creationist geologist as well. I don't know where they found these geologists. I honestly have no idea. But sort of all of them are very. Nobody pays any. Like, they really have just destroyed their careers by this wholesale. Like, we're going to ignore the evidence and make up these. That is not a theory, by the way. It's barely a hypothesis.
Oh, well, he does provide another citation, believe it or not.
On top of the seat, on top of that layer of shale. So, and that would have a flat bottom, and when it blew away again, a flat top. So with his floating log mat model, Steve Austin in 1979 defended a PhD dissertation to explain the origin of the Kentucky 12 coal. Explaining the flat base, flat top, the thin benches, the bark chunks that are found in the coal, he could explain Kentucky 12 coal and received a PhD for that description. Interestingly enough, within 1 year, Mount St. Helens blew its top, and among other things, had an avalanche that flowed into the Spirit Lake, pushing the water of Spirit Lake out of the lake, up the side of the mountain around the lake, that with a tidal wave that was more than 300 feet high. That tidal wave picked up trees and all the plant material and soil and all that off of those mountains, and then finally settled back into where the lake originally was. But by now, the avalanche material had raised the bottom and thus raised the lake a number of feet. And when it all settled out, at the end of this, floating on top of the new Spirit Lake was 1 million logs that had been scraped off the side of the mountains around it. These logs then rolled against one another, rolled their bark off, the bark settled down to the bottom of the lake, and became a great test plot for Steve Austin's theory. And so he went diving in the lake to see if, in fact, there was bark at the bottom of the lake, and alas, he found in places up to 3 feet of bark underneath this floating log mat on Spirit Lake. So he seemed to have a great explanation for the origin of coal, at least the Kentucky 12, and I can extend it beyond that because the coal seams that I've seen have these features. I haven't looked at it microscopically for the pieces of bark, but the other features are quite evident in every coal seam I've seen. In addition, when you follow these benches out, invariably the benches become or go right into marine sediments.
Oh, I know this guy. He's the guy that messed up the potassium argon dating analysis for Mount St. Helens.
Oh. Wait,
Right.
was he the guy who dated Mount St. Helens to millions of years old? Was he the guy?
I'm pretty sure he is, yeah.
That's amazing.
And I'll put it in private chat because I found his paper on Mount St. Helens, and I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm just giving it a cursory look at the moment, admittedly, but I think I've read this before, and I think he's the guy.
Oh. Well. Interesting. But yeah. Believe it or not, I did find an article from 2018 that supports this idea.
Conference on Creationism, yeah, of course.
Which fits this hypothesis as well.
Totally unbiased.
Yep.
And then this happens.
It's also consistent with the fact that we have taken carbon-14 ages on coals, and we don't get millions of years for the age of the coals. We get thousands of years, certainly closer to the biblical account.
Yeah. So the conclusion, yeah. So the conclusion of his paper on Mount was the primary assumption with the potassium argon model dating is based to assume 0. Argon 40 in the mineral phases. This assumption has been shown to be faulty. Argon occlusion in mineral phases, dacite of Mount St. Helens, reasonable assumption. The study raises more fundamental questions. So basically, he's just saying, "Hey, I found it to be old, so potassium argon doesn't work."
Yeah. Mhm. But creationists doing radiometric dating just it burns my soul. It burns my soul
Mm-hmm.
because, like, sorry, I gotta rewind a little bit just to drive home. Like this 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 is pain.
It's also consistent with the fact that we have taken carbon-14 ages on coals, and we don't get millions of years for the age of the coals. We get thousands of years.
Carbon-14 go to millions of years.
Are you serious? You can't carbon date stuff to millions of years. It has like 50,000 to 80,000 maximum, depending on your sensitivity. 50,000, yeah. Like you can't do that. Once it decays so rapidly that after that time you have no sample left.
Yeah.
Oh, what is wrong with you?
Yeah, like
we've carbon dated these things and got the maximum date for carbon dating we can do with any accuracy. Really? Can't imagine why.
Yeah. Not only that, like coal seams are extremely easy to, or insanely easy to contaminate with fresh carbon.
Yeah.
Because most of them, unless they get very much metamorphosed, they're extremely easy to transfer water through it, which can include water from the surrounding soil. And just little behind the scenes, I was watching this as I edited it, so I didn't watch it all the way through first. So I got done editing this bit, and then I was just immediately slammed with this.
Yeah.
Like I had to step away from editing for a bit because my brain just exploded.
As well. It's also consistent with the fact that we have taken carbon-14 ages on coal.
Can I show something quickly?
Sure, but like, do you see what I mean now when I say he's being deliberately dishonest?
Yeah.
Like, he cannot get that.
You can't talk about like carbon dating and say, hey, it doesn't support what we see. Just give me a sec. Sorry, I just like because it's not supposed like that's exactly what we would expect. That's the thing. Like if you're using carbon dating to carbon date something, you're not ever going to get millions of years old. That's never going to happen, right?
No,
because
it physically cannot happen.
It can't happen. Where am I? There we go.
Okay, you're on stream. Yeah. Oh, accidentally disconnected Ember.
Get out of here, Ember. This is just makes me so mad I'm going to disconnect somebody randomly. Ember, you're out of here. I'm so mad I'm just throwing Ember out of the room.
But it just... This is part of why I tried to get Beamsy back in here, because I know if he saw this, he would go ballistic.
Yeah, so that's a geologist that doesn't know how radiometric dating works or carbon dating works.
With a PhD?
Yeah.
Even if he got it in the 80s, he has to know how this works. He has to be lying here. Like, I cannot think of another explanation for this. He has to be lying.
His religion isn't the reason
he's absolutely being dishonest.
His religion isn't the reason why he's been tossed out of academia. That's not the reason. It's because of this. Like, if you don't understand the limitations of carbon-14 dating as a PhD geologist, you have no business being in that field. Like, that's it. I can't believe this guy.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Literally, I don't believe it. You know, like,
you should be disbarred.
Oh,
or defrocked or whatever the hell it is you do.
Well,
I
basically,
think your
has
university
been. I mean,
can revoke your degree.
well,
I think
that's why
they can.
everybody that goes into creation ministry and stuff, or most people, just have no career outside of it. They're entirely dependent on the ministry in order to make money, because they will end up supporting things that are indefensible, just indefensible in their field. And then sort of they say, oh, well, it's all bias out. That it's not. It's just these people end up sacrificing their integrity for money.
Uh-huh.
That's it. But the sad part is, even if these guys, wanted to go back into mainstream, now they're it's kind of this weird thing that once you're in, there's no getting out, because now they're entirely dependent upon creation ministry for their livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
It's a trap. Oh, hey, Pragmatic Crystal, so good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while,
Yeah.
actually. It's great
Pragmatic.
Yeah, don't go
PC.
creative, folks.
Yeah,
millions of years,
once
to
you
the age
go,
of thousands of years,
So,
certainly closer to the biblical account.
Also, I feel like this bit is funny. So.
closer to the biblical account. Well, yeah, if you're talking millions of years, but still 10 times as much as the biblical account says. Okay, so the biblical account says 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Let's be generous. So that's at least 5 times what the biblical account says. How do you account for that? Oh, we're closer. We're closer. What are you talking about?
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah.
Amount of coal we have in the world of this nature, it's consistent. We can explain it with a.
Also, don't they almost always disregard carbon-14 anyway?
They do a lot of the time when it's sort of showing that it's not 6,000 or 10,000 years. Yeah.
So why is he using it now? Like, it's convenient for him.
I think it's just, I think what he's going for is carbon-14 doesn't work at all. Right, it just can't be trusted, doesn't work. No radiometric thing can be trusted, kind of thing. It produces unreliable. I mean, we know it produces really reliable results if done correctly, right? If you do it correctly and use the appropriate method and prevent contamination and things like that. But this is kind of, oh well, if it gets a bad result, then it's completely unreliable. We should just toss it all out and go with Bibble. That's what we should do.
In my dating methods video, I brought up a situation where they used argon to date the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. How far off do you think they were?
Which method did they use?
Argon. Half-life of 1.25 billion years. How far off do you think?
Yeah, I was probably going to say like a few billion years off, I would imagine.
They were off by 7 years.
Okay.
We can get that accurate. 7 years. From an event that happened 1900 or so years ago.
Well, how did they confirm that it was that accurate? How did they know the exact eruption date if it was that long ago?
So we have historical records. I forget who it was, but we do have records preserved from several people who witnessed the eruption from across the bay.
Okay.
Obviously, some of the refugees could read and write, and they wrote accounts. There is some debate on if it happened in late summer or fall, but we do know the year it happened in. I think it was 79 AD. I could be wrong on that. But regardless, using argon 7 years off. We can get very accurate. There was another study I cited that used carbon-14. Actually, I did two. One got the ages wrong because they specifically chose a sample that had been exposed to the volcanic gases. And volcanic gases contain a crap ton of carbon. And like they predicted, the results swung way higher than expected, like by between 4 and 18,000 years. But then another study analyzed some olive oil that had been preserved in a glass bottle. Yeah, I know, go figure, Romans. That one, I think it was only a decade or two off. I'd have to double check my sources. But it was still
when you
really close.
yeah, that's incredibly accurate when you're talking about, dating something that old.
It was like 20 or 30 years off. But yeah. Like, radiometric dating works if you use it right. This is not using it right.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And like, this reminds me of Hovind's challenge, where he says, take a piece of coal and send it to a bunch of laboratories. Because he knows the coal, well, maybe he doesn't know because he's an idiot, but the coal is obviously going to date wrong. Yeah. Because the most we can get is 50-ish thousand years. Mm-hmm. And we don't get big coal beds like these anymore, because now we have bacteria that can break down most of this organic matter. The only exceptions being like peat bogs where there is no oxygen.
Yeah.
Tasty peat bogs.
Just, yeah. This convinced me he has to be lying.
Continent-sized floating forest. Also, the geographic distribution of that coal. At the time the coal was deposited, there's reason to believe that the continents were together. Europe was adjacent to North America, and the distribution of coal is across eastern U.S., Europe, and western Russia. It is that region that could easily have been under a huge log mat that had been destroyed from the floating forest, floating over that region.
Western Russia.
How to explain the coal in Australia, numbnuts?
I'm not a geographer, but I think Western Russia is a little bit far from the area he was saying.
It floated very far.
Western Russia. Isn't the coal in Eastern Russia?
I mean,
he said Western.
He did say
know.
Western.
I couldn't believe either.
Yeah, so Russia, major coal reserves. I can share it with you.
Or is it the east or west?
It's kind of. Oh God! All right. It's kind of spread out, but most of it is actually in eastern Russia, as I thought. Right, so you've got all of the hard coal reserves over here. Oh, you're not sharing it. Okay, well,
well, fine.
There you go.
Right, so there is the Moscow Basin, right, over on the east, and the Donetsk Basin and stuff like that. But it's mostly over in central and eastern Russia. That's the thing. And Australia has massive coal reserves. Was that a floating mat forest as well? That's one big log mat right there. That's an insanely big log mat.
A little bit. Just a little bit.
But what did he say? It was the size of a continent kind of thing? Like, I just, I don't know why we would think that would be a thing. Like, have you got any evidence for this floating log mat besides it makes your coal theory work? I mean, I'm using theory very generously and very sort of in a colloquial sense.
Yeah.
But you have any evidence for that? Because, I mean, Australia has massive amounts of coal.
He has no evidence. It would just be convenient.
Right.
Yeah, I'd also be curious how he explains the coal in Antarctica.
That's a good point.
How about the coal I found in my hometown? Like, just... Geez.
Iowa flavored coal? Inland sea? I don't know.
Yeah, it wasn't much, but I did find a little seam of it in a valley near my hometown. based on information I gathered, there had been a little delta there at some point in the past, and a bunch of plant matter had gotten buried at one point.
You know what occurs to me? How does he think natural gas forms?
Look, he can't
Right.
deal with solid stuff. You want him to try gas?
Well, the thing is that natural gas is sort of the same kind of process, but where it goes a lot deeper and heat makes the organic bonds break down and it becomes natural gas, right? And then it's trapped underground. Like, we can account for that. Because the same process, the pressure that makes coal form, if it goes deep enough, it's heated up. That heating causes it to degrade into gas. And then that natural gas is trapped by the rocks that are under. But that process can't work for what he's describing here.
But you're not supposed to think of that, though.
Okay.
Yeah, Hillhugger, why would a geologist know anything about coal and natural gas?
Oh dear, yeah. Maybe it was from all the dung on the ark, like made all the methane that, you know.
Yeah, because there was a lot
They were just
of dung.
tossing it overboard. It got the methane got trapped on look.
Man,
They should do it.
I would probably die watching it, the response, but I'd love to see what McQueen thinks of this idea.
Oh, I'd
Considering
love to
he
bring up
has
natural
worked
gas
in-
to McQueen.
Or he has worked
Oh,
in
I'd
that
love
field.
to bring that up.
Well, just the whole floating forest idea. I'm curious what he would think of it.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, yeah, you'd have to put aside a few hours to hear him answer, but sure.
Yeah.
World. Also, the fact that when we find this coal, we don't find one layer of coal, we find multiple layers of coal. The Kentucky 12 seam is the 12th seam in a series of seams that are counted from one direction or the other up. In the Illinois Basin, for example, we have 120 coal seams. And there's this repeated sequence of shale and limestone and coal and shale and limestone, coal and sand that goes all the way through the sequence. The coals come in and they go out. The coals come back again. It's consistent with the idea of a floating mat floating back and forth over this region, dropping coal as it did. So a given region.
Coal goes in, coal goes out. No one
and
can
keep in
understand
mind-
why.
All of this is during a catastrophic flood that destroyed, or is this before the flood? I'm totally lost
this
now.
is during the flood, because he's talking about Illinois.
Oh,
It just goes round and round like someone flushed the toilet.
was somebody piloting this floating forest? Like they had a motor on and they're going, look, we better do another pass to make another coal seam.
Wait,
You know what it was?
was the real arc. It was the real arc.
The real arc was the friends we made along
Wow.
the way.
See coal, and then there's going to be other things deposited, then another seam of coal, and then other things deposited, and another seam of coal. It explains the repeated sequence of sediments that we find associated with the coal. Also, when we study the coal, the rocks associated with the coal, the shales underneath and the shales above, we find there are fossils in here that don't change. From the base of the coal seams, these 120 coal seams, from the base of this all the way up to the top, both here in the United States and in Europe, we find the same fossils, same species, from the base of the coal seams all the way up to the top of the coal seams. And according to conventional dating, that's 100 million years of time.
I don't believe you.
No, I don't believe him either.
Maybe if we're talking plants, maybe the same family. I don't believe him on the species.
No, neither do I.
We have 100 million years in the rock record where the species don't change one bit. Now, it makes sense if, in fact,
That is just a complete and utter lie.
Mm-hmm.
There's been no point in Earth's history where we have had macroscopic life that it has not changed incredibly. Starting with the Eocene fauna before the Cambrian explosion, you can't go more than 20 million years without there being some major shift in some manner.
Yeah, all kinds of disruption events going on, and it's just
Most
The
of the coal he's
forces-
talking about. Oh, go ahead.
the forces that make coal generally also distort or outright destroy fossils. So in order to have species comparisons, he'd have to pull fossils from a nearby but different area, right?
Mhm.
Or am I just a silly person?
I don't know.
Well,
But,
yeah,
uh,
we-
Titan, to answer your question, uh, at least local coal seams, we've definitely dug down to the bottom of them, just because humans like coal, and there's so many abandoned coal mines where we just dug everything out.
Yeah, I'm reading one about one in Illinois where it's got like um, a whole bunch of really old plants down the bottom. But I'm trying to see if they found sort of
Yeah,
other ones higher up.
and oh man, if like the coal beds he's talking about, I'm pretty sure they're carboniferous in age. The Carboniferous is when we saw the first reptiles appearing on land, amphibians diversifying like crazy. Like, there was tons happening during this period in Earth's history.
Well, apparently few fossils are found in these areas because the chemicals in ancient swamps dissolve shells and bones. But
Okay.
other sites, sort of from Carboniferous, they yield fossils of millipedes and spiders and cockroaches and amphibians, like primitive
Yeah.
ones. So this idea that all throughout it they don't change at all, I think that is not true. I think that you do get a lot of burns and a lot of variation as you go up through the coal seam.
Yeah.
I think that that is just not true.
And
Oh,
you're
yeah.
right
I
there.
mean,
Oh god.
I just found an article about a fossil dinosaur um, track found in Ipswich, Australia.
Huh.
So that's in a coal seam,
Yeah. And
and that's
you're
Triassic.
you're probably right about some bogs not preserving fossils well. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's two major types of bogs. There's acidic
Okay.
ones and there's alkali ones. The
Oh,
alkali
obviously, I'm
ones
talking
are
about the
great at
acidic.
preserving
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
The acidic ones
Mhm.
destroy everything into just pure organic matter.
Yeah, so this is in a coal seam, and it's from a dinosaur from the Triassic. So
Are you sharing it or?
no, that's fine.
Oh,
That's fine.
okay.
I'm just sort of saying that we do find variation with in coal seams.
There's been, in fact, one flood and one destroyed ecosystem dropping its fossils over this area. It's the same fossils from the bottom to the top. That would be easily explained. So a floating forest ecosystem explains the evolutionary order, apparent evolutionary order of plant divisions. It explains why they're mostly extinct. It explains...
But it wouldn't, though, because even in this diagram, there are divisions within this floating forest, and presumably all the divisions would be floating together. So we should see a mix of creatures from one end to the other, and we don't.
Oh, interesting. One coal seam they found. This was in Gippsland, Victoria. They see the bushfires from lightning strikes. I can actually find that in there. So bands of charcoal are found throughout the brown coal seams, proving evidence of ancient bushfires caused by lightning strikes. That's cool.
I'm curious. Yes. So back in the 1800s, there was a coal mine where like a whole herd of iguanodons were found inside.
Oh, cool.
Like an entire herd.
Yeah.
Actually,
awesome.
it might have been two.
I like iguanodons.
Iguanodons are cool.
What's got two thumbs and uses them to do stuff.
But and the interesting thing is, they have to keep these skeletons in glass cases because all the chemicals in the coal made them insanely fragile. So they'll just crumble into dust if you're not careful with them.
Yeah, I'm amazed they've got it on display at all. Actually,
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have dozens of all ages too. It's pretty cool.
Also,
Almost
I
over.
didn't mention this, but you have this floating forest with animals that are
Almost over.
created for that floating forest. The animals created on the edge of this forest, where the mat was very, very thin, they've got to be specially designed organisms. I would suggest create fish that had legs that can move around on. They could use their legs to move around on the mat, but they didn't put their weight on the mat because otherwise it's so thin that they go through. So I believe God created special fishopods or something of that nature to live on the edge of these floating forests.
I'm sorry. There's trees on these floating mats, but at the same time, they're so thin that a fish can't put its weight on the mat.
No, Mark. The trees are near the continents. The fish are out in the ocean where it's thin.
Oh.
Yeah,
That said, you keep your grubby hands off Tiktaalik. you no touchy my fish.
Yeah. This seems like a desperate attempt to get Tiktaalik into the creationist idea of what happened kind of thing. It was a special creation to deal with the mats that definitely happened. Like, that definitely believe us happened. Yeah, this is terrible.
Who was that idiot you had a debate with that didn't think Tiktaalik was real?
Oh no, that was some guy. It was Studio 315 Apologetics or some random dude.
Studio 215, Jamie.
Yes, something like that. Yeah, that's the guy. He was sort of like, it was 3 fossils all put together, and it was a big conspiracy kind of thing. And it's like, no, we found 3 of them. They weren't put together. It just. We had 3 fossils, and we said, hey, we kind of can tell what the entire animal looked like because we have these 3 fossils of Tiktaalik kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them none of them were actually complete, but due to the overlap, we could tell. And he's sort of like, they tried to put them together and say it was it's like, that's not how that works. Like, oh no, oh no, like, oh no.
In the flood, those animals were deposited associated with the plants at the edge of the forest. You would first get the fish deposited away from the floating forest, then the fishopods, then you would get the critters in the center of the forest, like the amphibians, and then you'd finally get the land animals later. This sequence would explain the sequence of vertebrates.
So were these just dropping dead the entire time the flood was going on?
And was
holding
God
onto a
just
log and going down with the log?
God just airlifting them in here, or are this like super rapid mega evolution? Like, what are we talking about here?
Poofed into existence. Fishopods.
To land. It explains the marine sediments that are associated with this, the biomass of the coal. It incorporates Joachim Cheven's anatomy of the coal trees, and it incorporates Steve Austin's log mat model for the origin of coal. If you accept that interpretation, then if we look back at the biostratigraphic column, the floating forest biome is located here it's in the lower half of the column of flood fossils. And that suggests that everything in the lower part here is actually marine. All the evidence that people have pointed to for terrestrial sedimentation would actually be in a floating forest over the marine realm. So technically, it's a marine.
But it's not.
It's not.
A floating forest wouldn't create a paleosol, and we have so many paleosols. Do you guys know what a paleosol is?
Nope.
Is it
What's
like an
paleosol?
aerosol, but in the dirt?
So, sol is just, I think it's Greek for dirt, and paleo is old, so it's old dirt.
Oh, okay, cool.
It's what happens if, like, say you have a forest and the dirt in the forest gets fossilized, or a grassland, something like that.
Right, yeah.
It's mostly biologically created soils.
So it's kind of fossil soil kind of thing.
Yeah, like the entire thing
Okay.
is essentially a fossil of different stuff mixed together.
Yep.
And like you can find roots in them or specific species, but we have those all over the place. Like I brought up a shirt I have that's stained red. That's from a paleosol from the late Triassic. That's right where this blue line kind of ends, I think, in his model, quote unquote.
Using that very generously, but
Very generously.
Marine ecosystem. That would make all of this marine, and it would make everything above that terrestrial. So the flood starts out by taking out things in the marine realm. First, what's called the Cambrian fauna that live primarily on the bottom of the shallow marine zone, and then take out the Paleozoic marine fauna with the floating forest, and then moves onto the land, picking up the dinosaur biomes, the gymnosperms associated with them. So we have a marine to land transition in the course of the flood. I believe that the fossils of the flood are in fact best explained by the flood. Processes responsible for the major features of the Earth's fossil record.
I'm sorry. Did he just say the fossils of the flood are the best explained by the flood?
Mm-hmm.
I think
And that there was a transition to terrestrial fossils during the flood when there was no land.
How is that?
especially when a lot of the stuff in this area was terrestrial. Like, you tell me
And
a
you're
Gorgonopsid
describing
lived in the water.
evolution. He's describing evolution, the same evolution that you don't believe in.
Like, if this is true, then I think the flood happened, the flood dried up, everything on land appeared, and then post-flood ? Also, this ends so abruptly. Like, I did not edit the ending of this other than it being sped up.
I believe that the fossils of the flood are in fact best explained by the flood. Processes responsible for the major features of the Earth's fossil record are a global sedimentation, deposition in water, deposition by catastrophe, and in fact, destruction of everything on the planet, which is consistent with God's judgment of man's sin in the flood in the days of...
Oh, it's consistent. Okay.
Oh, it did. Yeah.
So that was this whole mess. This is what editing looks like, people, and it's a real chop job.
Snip, snip.
Like, he talks so slow. He rambles like crazy. He doesn't make sense most of the time.
Yeah.
This guy is an embarrassment to geology.
That's the consensus of most geologists, yeah. But they seem to have these 2-3 people like McQueen, like this guy, like Steve Austin. They seem to just roll them out, to make up something to explain away, because there is no evidence for what he's suggesting, and this is going to be sort of what I'm going into against McQueen. He's got to provide evidence for his model, not evidence against some other model, right? So you can't just attack the mainstream model and prove your own.
Yeah,
you've got to come up with evidence for yours.
Yeah,
and that's what
if
these
he's
guys
works. You need
Mhm.
to provide an explanation if you think the mainstream one is insufficient, and he
but not just
doesn't
provide
give
an
any evidence for his explanation.
Right. So all it
Sorry,
is
you have to
a
justify your
story.
explanation.
Right. You have to justify what your explanation is, what the evidence is for that explanation, how yours is the one that has the weight of evidence behind it. And it just doesn't. Like your idea that floating Matt Forrest can wander back and forth, dropping stuff, like it's just, can you do any experiment to show that is actually a plausible explanation?
Here's what you can do with both this guy's and McQueen's arguments.
Yeah.
That's where they belong.
Yep. But that was a lot of
fairness,
fun. I mean, wow. I think the safe thing was the highlight for me. That was the highlight, definitely.
But in fairness to AIG and the other creationists, they do their part by recycling bad arguments.
Bad arguments, yeah.
I think next time it's going to be something shorter.
You found out how long editing actually takes, didn't you?
And this was just chopping up. Like,
Yep.
There's like a
takes forever.
10-minute video on YouTube. I'm kind of thinking either for this or for video. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, what can I say? The C14 did it for me. That's
Yeah.
that got me. that got me. Like a geologist, a PhD. No, a Harvard-educated PhD geologist
You keep giving
is
his credentials, and it keeps getting worse.
a Harvard-educated PhD geologist is astounded and sort of says carbon-14 doesn't work because we found these materials at the limit of carbon-14. Like it is baffling how somebody can get to this position in life. This is your brain on religion. Holy crap. And the explanation is so simple. It's that the half-life of carbon is so short that by the time you hit 50,000 years, there is not enough carbon to accurately date these things. There's just not. Oh, wow, dude. Oh, wow. There's just, yeah. Okay.
I think I might extract all this and make a little quick thing for Beamsy. Just so he can
send it to Beamsy. Yeah, he's gonna put his head through his desk.
Can I not just copy and paste it? Jesus. Clipchamp is... I feel like this is an okay software, but it's also a pain.
I've got a better one. The one that I use, I've found, like, I'm in love with it. It is amazing, and I love it, and it's awesome. It's called Shotcut, and I love it so much.
Okay, I don't know what the hell that did. Shotcut, you said? Shotcut. Okay. Here, you know what? How far are we in the stream? Yeah, I can remember the timing, and I'll just record this afterwards.
It's this hypothesis as well. It's also consistent with the fact that we have taken carbon.
All right. Well, I think we can probably call that the end, guys. Thanks for joining me. Anything going on in your channels soon?
Yeah, well, I've got Aimbot tomorrow, which is just a fun little segment that I do. And I do have a debate with our good friend David McQueen coming up, and that one is on the 21st Eastern Time at 8 p.m. So that's going to be interesting and fun, and I'm going to really enjoy that. Because I don't think McQueen deserves the respect that he gets, quite frankly. I think that doesn't matter if you're a PhD geologist. If you're talking nonsense, you're talking nonsense. And he's recently come out saying that he solved the heat problem. So I'm not.
Really?
He finally presented that. He finally came up with that.
Yes, he presented like a one-line equation, which they didn't, like Donnie sort of said, let's not go into it on this stream, but we will be explaining it. Guess what they've never done since?
Explain it.
Right.
So one line?
Apparently so.
How long was the line?
Oh, you could do it in like just less than 10 characters. E equals MC squared. The heat was transformed into more matter.
Okay, Hillhugger, I will agree. Everyone is ignorant on some things. But there are some things that some people have no excuse on being ignorant of.
Maybe that's where all the water came from, was the heat problem. The energy was transformed into... Yeah.
Into water?
Yes.
God instructed the fountains of the deep to undergo, nuclear fission? Or is it fusion? And produce hydrogen and oxygen and burn them together to make water.
Well, it'd be nucleosynthesis to produce the hydrogens, and then several stages of fusion to produce the oxygens. Like, we're talking one layer out from the core of a star the size of our sun. to make oxygens. So we have an even bigger heat problem than we thought, but now we've got oxygens, and then we can electrolysis them together to make water.
Yeah, the excess energy just goes into electrolysis. It's not
That's
that
the
bad.
ticket. It's an endothermic reaction. It'll be fine.
Anything coming up on your channel, Amber?
Oh, the usual array of fun stuff. Most immediately tomorrow, I've got a premiere for Pride Month stuff. Another pro science channel, Planar Walk, came out just the other day, and there is a lot to talk about that. So that's what that one's about. And then Wednesday, I'm going to be exploring what exactly joining the Satanic Temple means on a live stream. That should be fun. And then on Thursday, we've got the opposite end of Pride. An evangelical jerk goes and invades a Pride festival, and it goes exactly as well as you might imagine. Let's see. I'm sure there's a bunch of other stuff, but off the top of my head, Sunday, John from Godless Engineers dropping by for an interview, much like Peter's yesterday.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
How was reading the Book of Mormon? Was it yesterday or the day before?
Was yesterday Sunday? I'm seriously
Yes.
starting to lose track. Yeah, that's another thing I do, though. It's not on my own channel. It was pretty fun. We only had a few people there. I'm glad I came because they would have had even fewer people. But they had two scholars and Aaron and myself, and so I did my best to do a Jimmy Snow and make lots of inappropriate jokes.
I could join that if you want. I mean, I've been researching the Book of Mormon recently. It's a rabbit hole. It is a rabbit hole of crazy kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. We were in the part where the Mormons went to a place called Mormon, where there were fountains of Mormon by the waters of Mormon in the forest of Mormon. Like, I don't think Joseph Smith was that creative a fellow.
I don't think so either. And sort of his it's the submarines that get me. That's what gets me. That's the thing that does my head in. The boats
I'm
that
excited
sailed
for
across
those later.
the Pacific. The boats that sailed across the Pacific, which is the long way round from the Middle East to the Americas, by the way. I just have to add that. In sealed barges, completely unpowered, right? So they had no power whatsoever, and they made the trip in like 344 days, like less than a year. That's insane. That's insane.
Oh well. Speaking of insanity, I might try and slip into Standing for Truth stream.
Ooh, yep, that's insanity.
Well, I might hold off on it. The reason why is because I'm on the 1st of the 7th slated to go up against Raw Matt, who's Matt Naylor from in there. So I don't really want to sort of, throw my best arguments out there kind of thing. I think I'll give it a pass for this one. But that's why.
What do you think I should go in trying to argue?
Sorry?
Oh, just what do you think I should go in trying to argue?
Oh, any of the major, evidences for evolution. I mean, you've got genetic evidence, you've got fossil evidence. I mean, your strong suit is fossils, right? So, making the argument that, hey,
I try and see if they can figure out where a bird and dinosaur divide.
Ooh, that'd be
that's
fun.
A good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. But just sort of the way the fossils are presented, if they sort of say, you probably want to get them into saying that the flood is what caused all the fossils, and then how does the flood organize these things? If they say the heavy ones sunk to the bottom, you can point out where the heavy ones are actually at the top, not the bottom, kind of thing. So a lot of these sort of proof, but I think that's where your strong suit is. So, I mean, I would probably go with that one, to be honest with you.
I can give it a shot, I guess. Well,
Well,
then
if you want,
let's
it's entirely up
probably
to you.
call the stream.
I mean, it is standing for truth's room. It is going to be incredibly biased, and just
Yeah.
it is what it is. It is what it is.
As they say.
All right. Well,
And
have a good night,
Amy
everybody.
Newman, if
Oh.
you would like something a bit more reasonable, Amy Newman's got a skeptic and ranting coming up.
Oh, yeah, I saw.
what
It's
is
like,
it?
Are aliens demons or something like
Are
that?
Okay.
aliens demonic is the thing. So if you want something a bit more like lighthearted and fun, Amy is going to open up her room in about half an hour or so. So there
I'll
you go.
probably hop in the chat after trying Standing for Truth then. Definitely.
Yeah, I'm going to
Amy's
get
streams
some
are fun.
lunch. I may or may not be on Amy's. I'll try to make it, but yeah, I've got some stuff to do, but that's okay. I will try.
Yeah, similar. I'd like to see, but at the same time, I may fall asleep at any moment
That's
without
okay,
warning.
buddy. That's all right.
That's fair.
That's okay.
Well, thank you both for coming along tonight. Thank you, everyone who's
you.
watching, for watching. Don't forget to visit these fine gentlemen's channels. Both of them have lots of wonderful content, and as you've heard, more coming soon.
And don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps out the Deino incredibly. Just dropping a simple like helps out so much. It really does.
Yeah,
So if you've
comments
enjoyed
in
seeing,
the comment section.
yeah, if you enjoyed,
Share it around.
Let's see, maybe in the comments, share what you think the most ridiculous part of this presentation was.
oh, I know where my money's going. I really do. Holy crap!
All right. Well, have a great night, everyone, or morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Have a good one.